I woke up at a funeral, completely confused. People were coming and going, offering condolences. Before I could figure out what was happening, a girl in a plaid shirt came up to me and mocked me, saying no one would protect me anymore. I tried to look at her, but suddenly felt so dizzy that I collapsed. When I woke up again, I realized I had transmigrated again. This time, I ended up in the body of a girl whose name sounds just like mine. Even stranger, I landed in the era when my first life parents were born, a time when people shouted to communicate, walked everywhere, and needed ration tickets to buy anything. I tried to access my special space from before, but it was gone. It seems I traded that ability for this new life. As I sorted through the original girl's memories, I learned she had made some terrible mistakes. She gave away the job her adoptive mother left her to a woman named Sun Shiaan, the sister of a man she had a crush on, Sun Ruiming. Worse, she got tricked into signing up to go to the countryside as a sent-down youth, leaving in just 1 week. Then, while out shopping, she caught Sun Ruiming secretly meeting another girl, Su Yu, supposedly his distant cousin, who had been the one pushing hardest for her to go to the countryside. She overheard their conversation and finally realized the entire Sun family had been scheming against her all along. She was heartbroken but too afraid to confront them, so she just went home in a daze. But before she even got through the door, someone told her that her grandfather had been in an accident on his way back to the capital. He was in the hospital, barely alive. When she rushed there, the doctor said they had done everything they could. His injuries were too severe. She ran in and found him covered in blood. Her grandfather, old Master Chu, was a lifelong doctor. He knew he didn't have much time. With his last strength, he told her about a hidden compartment under his bed and said if she ever needed help, she should go find the Hua family. He also warned her that Sun Ruiming was not a good person. She promised him she would never let Sun Ruiming control her again. Hearing that, her grandfather looked relieved. His final wish was that she treat the engagement with the Qin family as just an ordinary relationship. He didn't want her to be mistreated by the Qin family's eldest daughter-in-law. She agreed right away, since she never liked the Qin family's youngest son, Qin Zhonghui anyway. And that is how my new life began. Even though Grandpa worried about me until the very end, knowing that the Gu and Hua families would look after me gave him some peace. But despite all his love, he still passed away. The original girl let out a heartbreaking cry, and the double blow of losing her grandfather and discovering the betrayal was too much for her. Her mind shattered, and she died right there at the funeral. That's when I took over her body. After sorting through all her memories, I felt sorry for the original girl. I also realized that Grandpa's accident was probably not a simple accident at all. Since I've taken over her life, I am Chu Yunyi now. I swore to myself, everyone who schemed against her or hurt her, I will make them pay. And whoever caused Grandpa's death, I will absolutely not let them get away with it. What I didn't know yet was that in a house somewhere in the capital, a powerful man was already talking about what happened. He was furious that his plan had failed. He had sent people to kill someone named Hua Wanqing, but Grandpa had stepped in at the last moment and saved the target. Hua Wanqing only got minor injuries, while Grandpa died from his wounds. The man was angry, calling Grandpa a meddling old fool who had ruined his plans more than once. Then, chillingly, he told his subordinate to take care of Grandpa's granddaughter, meaning me. He wanted it done without leaving any trace. The subordinate hurried off, sweating nervously, knowing he had to do the job perfectly or face his master's wrath. He had already investigated the Chu family thoroughly. Meanwhile, at the Qin family's house, another argument was happening. The eldest daughter-in-law, Wu Lijuan, was trying to convince old Master Qin to cancel the childhood engagement between me and her son, Qin Zhonghui. She argued that her son had a girl he actually liked, and that forcing them together would only make everyone miserable. Old Master Qin was furious. He slammed his hand on the table and accused her of being disloyal and short-sighted. He said the engagement had existed since Zhonghui was 9 years old, and breaking it now would make people call him ungrateful. He reminded her that Grandpa died while saving someone, and because of that, the Hua and Gu families would be my protectors in the future. He called her view foolish, truly a short-sighted woman's thinking, but Wu Lijuan had her own selfish plans. She softened her tone and tried a different angle, reminding the old man that people forget favors quickly once someone is gone. And then she played her final card, pointing out that I wasn't even a blood relative of the Chu family. The Hua family helped arrange everything for Grandpa's funeral. We set up a memorial at home. Before the funeral was even over, the Sun family had the nerve to show up, talking sweet but with scheming written all over their faces. I'm not the original girl. I won't put up with their nonsense. After the funeral, Hua Wanqing came to my house along with some people from the Gu family. After some small talk, they got straight to the point. Hua Wanqing pulled out a leather envelope and offered it to me as a token of gratitude from the Hua family. He promised that whenever I needed help, the Hua family would be there for me, as long as it wasn't anything illegal. Then Gu Peiyan stepped forward, looking guilty. He also handed me a leather envelope and apologized, saying Grandpa had suffered because of the Gu family's troubles. He gave me a piece of paper with the Gu family's contact information in different places, telling me I could reach out anytime. Grandpa's death was directly connected to them, but he was already gone. Saying more wouldn't bring him back. I took the contact list but glanced at the envelopes on the table and pushed them back. I told them clearly, my grandfather was an innocent victim and they knew that better than anyone. But every wrong has its source, and every debt has its debtor. I didn't want their money. They tried to convince me, but I stopped them. I only had one question. Who is behind all of this? Hua Wanqing and Gu Peiyan exchanged a look. They didn't want to burden me since I was still young, but they also felt I had the right to know, especially since the person behind it had no moral limits. Gu Peiyan told me with a serious face that it was the Shin family in the capital, led by a man named Shin Chongyang, who had a deep grudge against the Gu family. I listened carefully, and a cold determination flashed through me. I told them I was heading to the countryside in a few days and asked them to keep an eye on the Shin family for me. If they learned anything, I wanted to know. They were both surprised when I mentioned going to the countryside. Hua Wanqing frowned and said that according to policy, I didn't need to go. Grandpa had even told him I was about to start working at a hospital. Why would I suddenly be going to the countryside? I didn't plan to hide anything from them. If I left without telling them the truth, the Sun family would definitely try to take advantage. So I explained everything, how I'd been tricked into giving up my job and signing up to be a sent-down youth. Hua Wanqing's expression was hard to describe, but he seemed relieved that I had at least woken up to the truth before it was too late. Then I thought about what the original girl had overheard between Sun Ruiming and Su Aiyu, and I narrowed my eyes. If they thought they could scheme against me, they were dreaming. I asked Hua Wanqing for a favor. I couldn't undo the countryside assignment, but I wanted him to help me change my destination to the northeast. He frowned and said the northeast was too cold for a young girl. But I had my reasons. In the northeast, winters are so harsh that people stay indoors for months, which means less physical labor compared to other places. It was actually the easier option. Seeing that my mind was made up, he agreed to help arrange it. After all, I was now someone both the Hua and Gu families had vowed to protect, and they weren't about to let anyone take advantage of me. No matter how much I refused, the Hua and Gu families still left the leather envelopes behind when they left. They felt responsible since Grandpa died, because of their affairs. As soon as I walked them out, I noticed Sun Ruiming's mother standing nearby, chatting with someone but constantly glancing toward my house. I smirked to myself. Can't even wait, can she? Everything the Sun family owes the original girl, I'll collect it all back, one debt at a time. I slammed the gate shut, blocking all the nosy stares. Meanwhile, not far from my house in a nearby park, Sun Ruiming and Su Aiyu were sneaking off into the woods together. Su Aiyu was worried that if they kept hiding their relationship, her mother would arrange a marriage for her. Sun Ruiming told her to be patient. Once I went to the countryside, he'd have his family formally propose to hers. When Su Aiyu asked if I would let them get away with tricking me, Sun Ruiming laughed smugly. He said that when Grandpa was alive, he would have had to marry me first before getting his hands on the Chu family's assets. But now that the old man was dead, he could do whatever he wanted. Then he revealed his real plan. He had specifically arranged for me to be sent to the countryside near his hometown so that people there could watch me. He could control whether I ever came back to the city, all depending on his mood. Chu Yunyi giggled and called him naughty, and the two of them got cozy with each other, flirting shamelessly. Back at home, I was busy getting things in order. Going to the countryside didn't bother me at all. In fact, it gave me a perfect excuse to act differently from the original girl, since the people around here had known her for 4 years. A sudden personality change would raise questions, but starting fresh somewhere new would explain everything. With only a few days left, I had a lot to do. I took the leather envelopes the Hua and Gu families left and went to Grandpa's room. Following the original girl's memories, I found the hidden compartment under the bed, pressed the switch, and took out everything inside. Grandpa had told the original girl about this before, but back when he was alive, she never worried about anything and never paid attention. Inside, I found 4 bank books and a small wooden box. Grandpa had always said these would be her dowry someday. The bank books added up to over 20,000 yuan, a huge amount of money in this era. I opened the Hua and Gu family's envelopes, and just as I expected, each family had given 5,000 yuan. Then I checked the drawer where Grandpa kept his pocket money and found another 100 or so. Altogether, it came to about 31,000 yuan. Looking at all this money, I felt emotional. I'm not the real Chu Yunyi, and I couldn't get past that fact in my heart. So I made a decision. I would treat this money as a loan from the Chu family. Once I used it to build up enough capital and earn my own money, I would donate the full amount in the Chu family's name. With that settled, I calmed myself down, set the bank books aside, and opened the small wooden box. The first thing I saw in the wooden box was a necklace. The original girl had worn it around her neck since she was little. It wasn't anything valuable, just a peachwood zodiac pendant with a brownish stone-like charm hanging below it. Apparently, this was what she was wearing when her adoptive parents found her as a baby. Judging by how simple it was, she probably wasn't treated well by her birth parents either. The only useful thing about it was that her birth date was carved on the back of the wooden pendant, almost like whoever left her knew she'd be abandoned. Pretty ironic. I had no interest in finding her birth family. I was perfectly happy being an orphan and didn't want a bunch of strangers showing up claiming to be relatives. Underneath the necklace were 2 property deeds. One was for this house, and the other belonged to her adoptive mother, Ding Zhilan. That second house was rented to the government, and the rent used to go to Ding Zhilan. After she died, Grandpa changed it so the payments went to the original girl. Since I was leaving for the countryside soon, I'd need to visit and sort that out before I left. While I was thinking all this through, someone started banging on the gate, yelling my name. I recognized the voice immediately. It was the Sun family. I hadn't even gone to settle scores with them yet, and here they were coming to me first. A wave of anger rose inside me, maybe leftover from the original girl's feelings. I jumped up too fast and scraped my hand on the sharp edge of the open hidden compartment. Blood started seeping out right away. Knowing the Sun family was here for the money and property, I ignored my bleeding hand and quickly put the deeds back in the box. I was about to toss the cheap necklace back in two when a drop of blood from my wound fell onto that brownish pendant. Just as I was about to wipe it off, a scene suddenly flashed in my mind. I've had special abilities before in a past life, so I knew exactly what this meant. It was a hidden opportunity, some kind of magical space tied to the pendant. I was shocked and thrilled, but also couldn't quite believe it. But this wasn't the time to explore it, because the knocking outside was getting louder. I quickly bandaged my hand, put everything back in the hidden compartment, and went to open the gate. There stood son Ruiming's mother with a fake sweet smile, asking why I took so long. I didn't invite her in. She glanced sideways at the nosy neighbors peeking over and said she was worried about me being lonely and wanted to keep me company. I wasn't about to waste time with her. I told her I was tired and wanted to rest. That shut her up for a moment, though I could tell she was cursing me inside while keeping a smile on her face. She said not to worry, that even though Grandpa was gone, their family would always be there for me. I looked her straight in the eye and told her there was nothing to worry about. Grandpa had already arranged everything for me, so she didn't need to trouble herself. I kept my tone civil on purpose. I didn't want to tip off my revenge plans by being too harsh. Before she could say anything else, I told her I was going to rest, nodded politely to the neighbors, and shut the gate. Nobody on this street is stupid. The neighbors could all see what the Sun family was after. They wanted to swallow up an orphan's inheritance. But given that Grandpa had just been buried, everyone understood why I wasn't in the mood to deal with them. As soon as I locked the gate, I rushed back to Grandpa's room and pulled the necklace out of the hidden compartment. The brownish pendant hanging below the peach wood charm looked noticeably clearer and more translucent than before. My heart was racing. I tried reaching out to it with my mind, and my guess was confirmed. This pendant contained a hidden space, a personal dimension. It was like finding light at the end of a dark tunnel. I wanted to scream with excitement, but I held it in to avoid drawing attention. I focused my thoughts, and in an instant, my whole body vanished from the room. I was inside the space. Looking around, it was nothing compared to the space I had in my previous life, but it was still an incredible stroke of luck. After the initial thrill, though, I felt a bit let down. The good news was that having this space would make everything easier going forward, and it gave me a secret advantage no one could take away. The bad news was that this entire space was just rocks of different sizes and colors, but not a single speck of green anywhere. The only structures were a stone house in the center and a stone pavilion nearby. I walked over to the pavilion, thinking it was just a resting spot, but I found a well inside it. Next to the well stood a small stone carved with the words, "Spirit Spring." The stone's material looked exactly like the pendant after it absorbed my blood. I realized I had misjudged it before. That pendant wasn't some worthless rock. It was something extraordinary. The well water was close enough to touch, and it was clearly special too. I made a mental note to taste it once I understood the space better. But before I could explore further, someone knocked on my gate again. Annoyed, I left the space, deciding I'd come back to investigate properly once night fell. I opened the gate and found Sun Ruiming standing there with a fake concerned expression. The original girl really had terrible taste in men. He reached out trying to grab my hand, but I stepped aside. He asked if I was okay, and I gave him a cold look. "You can see for yourself," I said. He assumed I was still grieving over Grandpa and didn't think much of my distant attitude. He offered to come inside and keep me company. Apparently, the original girl always welcomed him with a big smile whenever he said that. He was already lifting his foot to walk in when I blocked his path. I told him it wasn't appropriate for an unmarried man and woman to be alone together, especially now that Grandpa was gone, and I had to be careful about my reputation. He was clearly annoyed, but didn't dare push it. He said he'd come back tomorrow with his sister Shiaan to chat. I didn't agree or disagree, just said I was busy and he should go home. Then I shut the gate. It was getting late, and people would be coming home from work soon. Neighbors would probably stop by to check on the poor orphan girl, so I decided not to go back into the space. I had important things to do tonight, so I started making dinner early. Meanwhile, Sun Ruiming's mother stormed home in a rage, furious about how I had spoken to her. She cursed me under her breath and swore I'd pay for it. When Shiaan came home and called out for her, the mother snapped at her, taking out her frustration on her own daughter. Shiaan, knowing the warning signs of her mother's temper, quickly tried to smooth things over by asking who had made her so angry. What I didn't know at the time was that the Sun family was busy scheming behind my back. Sun Ruiming's mother was ranting about me at home, calling me horrible names. Shiaan rushed to the door to make sure no neighbors were listening, then told her mother to keep her voice down. If word got back to me, it could ruin her brother's plans. That calmed the mother down a little, but she told Shiaan something felt off about me. She said it made sense that the Hua and Gu families had handled Grandpa's funeral and kept the Sun family out of it. But today, when I refused to even let her through the front gate and told her I needed rest in front of all the neighbors, that didn't sit right with her. Shiaan tried to brush it off, saying I was probably just in a bad mood and wanted to be alone. But the mother wasn't buying it. She grumbled that I was acting like I still had someone backing me up and swore she'd make me pay for disrespecting her. Shiaan quickly told her mother to calm down and not cause trouble. She reminded her that the job I had given up, the one that was supposed to go to me, still hadn't been officially transferred. On paper, Shiaan was just filling in temporarily. If they made a scene now, it could all fall apart. The mother sighed and asked where Sun Ruiming was. Shiaan said he was off on his day off, probably hanging out with his shady friends. Then Shiaan brought up something that worried her. The people who helped with Grandpa's funeral seemed powerful. If they found out I had been tricked into going to the countryside, would they come after the Sun family? The mother thought about it and told Shiaan to go with Sun Ruiming to my place later that evening to try to get information out of me. Shiaan didn't really want to go. The house had just held a funeral, and she thought it was bad luck, but she agreed half-heartedly. Then she sighed that Grandpa's sudden death had ruined their original plan. The mother waved it off, saying that since I had powerful connections, I could easily get permission to return to the city if I wanted. They just had to make sure I didn't drag the Sun family into any of it. Shiaan laughed and said that with Sun Ruiming handling things, everything would be fine. With how madly the original girl loved him, she'd do whatever he told her. But the mother was annoyed with Sun Ruiming too. She complained that he was always running around instead of seizing this opportunity to lock me down. Before, Grandpa had disapproved of Sun Ruiming and opposed our relationship, so the Sun family had come up with underhanded tricks to work around him. They never expected Grandpa to suddenly die. While Grandpa was alive, Sun Ruiming had kept our relationship mostly secret because of Grandpa's reputation in the neighborhood, so few people knew about it. But since Grandpa's death, my attitude toward the Sun family had clearly changed, and the mother felt uneasy. She was afraid something might go wrong at this critical moment. Her plan was simple. When Sun Ruiming came home, she'd push him to win me over fast. Once I became part of the Sun family, everything I owned would become theirs. As it got dark, I made myself a small pot of vegetable porridge. The original girl hadn't been eating properly for days, and there wasn't much food in the house. Plus, with Grandpa just buried, I didn't want to change too many habits and make people suspicious. Just as I finished serving the porridge, someone called out from the gate. The voice sounded familiar, but I couldn't place it. When I opened the door, I saw Chu Yunyi standing there with a cold expression. I recognized him from the original girl's memories, the young man from the family Grandpa had arranged a childhood engagement with. He seemed annoyed I hadn't called him Brother Yunyi, like the original girl always did. He told me his grandfather wanted me to come visit their house tomorrow. I figured I would have gone to the Qin family anyway, but judging by Chu Yunyi's sour expression, his mother had clearly already gotten her way regarding the engagement. I simply nodded and said I understood. He tried to say something more, but I cut him off, telling him it wasn't appropriate to invite him in since we'd just held a funeral. He snapped back with an ugly look on his face, told me not to forget, and left. I scoffed to myself. If old Master Qin hadn't insisted on arranging this engagement years ago, neither Yunyi nor his mother would be in any position to look down on the original girl. Who did they think they were? After dinner, I walked around the yard to digest and think about my next move. I practiced a set of martial arts forms, and when the time was right, I changed clothes and got ready to make my move. Instead of using the front gate, I climbed a ladder and went over the wall. I could climb a tree to get back in later, and it would be quieter that way. I slipped through the shadows and made my way to the Sun family's compound. Using my space as cover, I snuck into their home and hid inside my space to listen. Thinking about what the original girl had overheard from Sun Ruiming before, I was disgusted. The whole family was full of schemes. Sun Ruiming had even planned to set up a trap to humiliate the original girl so she'd feel too ashamed to resist, making her easy to control forever. If he had succeeded, her life would have been ruined. Since he dared to think that way, I'd give him a taste of his own medicine, being publicly shamed and pointed at by everyone. That was something I was very good at. Just then, I heard Sun Ruiming's father talking inside. He told his son to stop running around and spend more time at my place, worried that someone else might steal the opportunity. Sun Ruiming replied lazily, telling his father not to worry. He bragged that even when Grandpa was alive, he couldn't stop the original girl from being devoted to him. Now that Grandpa was gone, she'd do whatever he said. Then Sun Ruiming's eldest sister-in-law spoke up, warning him that now that Grandpa was gone, plenty of families in the neighborhood had their eyes on me. She told him not to get careless or someone might steal me away. Sun Ruiming smugly replied that since I was heading to the countryside in a few days, nobody would have a chance to make a move. Then another voice chimed in, One of the family members asking if son Ruiming could convince me to lend them my house while I was away in the countryside, since it would just be sitting empty. The moment those words came out, everyone in the room turned to look at son Ruiming. Son Ruiming had his own calculations. He knew he couldn't rush things. Grandpa may be gone, but his old friends would still be keeping an eye on me for a while. Besides, he had selfish motives and wasn't about to do all the work just so the rest of his family could benefit. When his second sister-in-law asked about borrowing my house, he brushed her off, saying it was too soon. Then Shiaan jumped in, begging him to take me to finalize the paperwork for the job transfer. She said she couldn't relax until it was official. Once the paperwork was done, the neighborhood committee couldn't pressure her to go to the countryside anymore. Son Ruiming agreed easily and said he'd come find me tomorrow. Everyone in the room had their own greedy thoughts. Listening to all of this from inside my space, I let out a cold laugh. They were dreaming if they thought any of this would work out. Soon enough, none of them would be smiling. When night fell and the Sun family went to bed in their tiny apartment, 4 rooms carved out of 40 square meters, I made my move. The summer heat and cramped rooms meant every door was left open, which made things easy for me. Even though this body had no martial arts training, I still had the experience from 2 past lives. Pressing sleep pressure points was no problem at all. I went room by room, putting each family member into a deep sleep. Then I searched the house and collected all their money and ration tickets, storing everything in my space. I planned to exchange it all for supplies and donate it to a welfare home outside the city. The whole point of tonight's visit was to make sure that when I dealt with son Ruiming, his family wouldn't have the resources to bail him out. After that, I tampered with every valuable thing they owned. It wouldn't be long before their belongings started breaking down one by one. I admired my handiwork, dusted off my hands, and headed home. By the time I got back, it was the middle of the night. I was dying to explore my space more, but I had important things to do tomorrow. There would be plenty of time later. I'd deal with those horrible people first, then explore the space properly. But just as I lay down, I couldn't stop thinking about those gaps between the rocks and the space. Could I grow things there? I was too curious to resist, so I decided to try a quick experiment and check the results tomorrow. There were no seeds in the house, but I remembered that Hua Wanqing had brought a watermelon the other day, and there were some left in the storage room. I grabbed some watermelon seeds, took a small shovel Grandpa used for digging medicinal herbs, and then had another idea. I wanted to test the well water in the space, so I grabbed a clean glass jar, filled it with tap water from outside, and brought everything into the space. Growing things was something I had experience with. Normally, you'd soak watermelon seeds first before planting, but I didn't have time for that. I just dug holes and planted them directly. On one side, I watered with the tap water I'd brought in, and on the other side, I used the well water from the space. I'd compare the results later. With that done, I finally left the space and went to bed. If I didn't sleep now, the sun would be coming up. Meanwhile, at the Shin family's estate, the lights in the study were still burning. The head of the Shin family, Shin Chongyang, was furious. His people reported that the Gu family was fighting back hard, and the Hua family had been secretly helping them. Shin Chongyang was outraged. The Hua family had already crossed him by helping the Gu family find a doctor, and now they were openly siding with the Gu family. He fumed that the Hua family had no idea which side they should be on. What I didn't know was that the Shin family was also making plans about me. That night, Shin Chongyang decided to use me to send a message to the Hua and Gu families. He wanted to see how far they would go to protect the Chu family. At first, he ordered his men to kidnap me, but his subordinate warned him that I was a family member of a revolutionary martyr. My adoptive mother had been one, and using force could backfire. So Shin Chongyang changed the plan. Instead of kidnapping me, he told his men to just rough me up as a warning to the Hua and Gu families. The next morning, I rushed into my space the moment I woke up. I was too excited about the planting experiment. The seeds watered with regular tap water showed no change at all, but the ones watered with the well water from the space already had tiny green sprouts. I was thrilled. The gaps between the rocks really could be used for growing things. I was so happy I started jumping around on the stones. Suddenly, going to the countryside didn't bother me at all. It would be the perfect opportunity to collect all kinds of seeds. I left the space, got ready, and headed out. My plan was to grab breakfast, deal with the Qin family first, then go handle Sun Ruiming. I already knew his schedule for the day from eavesdropping last night. On my way, I passed a basketball court near the bus stop where some guys were playing. I was lost in thought and didn't notice what was happening. Suddenly, someone yelled a curse word, and before I could react, a basketball slammed right into my face. I crouched down in pain, covering my face with tears streaming and 2 streams of warm blood running from my nose. The players rushed over, panicking and apologizing nonstop. One voice stood out calm and cool, asking if I was okay. He offered me a brand new blue checkered handkerchief. I didn't take it. After the pain eased a bit, I looked up at them and snapped, asking how they even played basketball. The guy who threw the ball admitted fault and suggested I go to a nearby clinic. I knew I was fine and didn't want to waste time, so I glared at him and walked over to a public tap. The cold water stopped the nosebleed quickly. I cleaned myself up, shot one more annoyed look at the group still standing there, and left holding my buzzing head. What I didn't notice was that the guy who hit me kept staring at my back as I walked away, looking thoughtful. His friend nudged him and teased that he seemed disappointed not to have been accused of doing it on purpose. The guy elbowed his friend and said it was his fault for the bad pass that sent the ball flying. Then, he glanced one more time at my disappearing figure before running back to the court. When I arrived at the Qin house, everyone was clearly waiting for me. The eldest daughter-in-law, Wu Lijuan, actually had a smile on her face for once, but there was no warmth in it, just the satisfaction of someone who had gotten what she wanted. Old Master Qin's guilty expression confirmed what I had already guessed. He had given in to his family and agreed to break off the engagement. I wasn't about to help him save face. In the end, he had chosen to betray his promise for the sake of his grandson. I could understand the reasoning, but deep down, I had no respect for it. The moment I sat down at the Qin house, the eldest daughter-in-law Wu Lijuan couldn't wait to get started, nervously blurting out that they had something to discuss with me. But old Master Qin silenced her with a sharp look before she could finish. He turned to me and told me to sit. I walked over calmly and asked what was so urgent. He could tell from my composure that I already knew why I'd been called. He sighed and said that with Grandpa gone, the Qin family should be looking after me, but since Jiang Hui and I had never gotten along despite the engagement, he wanted to hear my thoughts. I wasn't going to make this easy for him. I told him sweetly that I'd follow his lead. After all, he was the one who had come to our door years ago to set up this engagement with Grandpa. With one sentence, I tossed the ball right back into his court. He closed his eyes for a long moment, then finally said that since Jiang Hui and I clearly had no fate together, the engagement would be called off. He admitted that he, Qin Taizhu, had wronged the Chu family and promised to compensate me properly. I wasn't stupid enough to refuse compensation. Grandpa had saved this man's life, and afterward, he had eagerly pushed for the engagement. Everyone knew why. Now that the Chu family had fallen, he was shamelessly breaking his word for his grandson's sake. When I stayed silent, he awkwardly asked what I wanted. I looked around to the whole family and said clearly that since Grandpa had saved his life and that's why he came to arrange the marriage, and since it was the Qin family choosing to break it off now, he could handle it however he saw fit. I had no objections. He was deeply embarrassed. He glanced at Wu Lijuan, who looked terrified he might give me too much, and told me to follow him to his study for a private talk. Wu Lijuan tried to stop him, but one look from the old man shut her down. I was curious what he had to say, so I ignored Wu Lijuan's threatening glare and followed him in. He wanted privacy, so his daughter-in-law wouldn't say something insulting and disgrace the family further. He also wanted as few people as possible to know about the compensation. He told me to sit, then opened a drawer. He said the Qin family had wronged me, and that he had wronged Grandpa. He pulled out a property deed and handed it to me, saying this house had always been intended as a gift for me. The only difference now was the reason behind it. When I started to speak, he cut me off, insisting I take it. He said only by accepting could he ease his guilt. I said the polite words of refusal, but I had absolutely no intention of actually turning it down. This property deed would settle all debts between the Chu and Chin families and cut the last tie between the original girl and these people. After some back and forth, seeing that old Master Chin was sincere about making things right, I accepted the deed, which already had my name written on it. When I walked back out to the living room, I sat down with a perfectly calm expression, as if nothing had happened. Before I left the Chin house, the eldest son Chin Hongling tried to look generous by offering to arrange a job for me as compensation. I could tell he was being fake, so I turned him down and said Grandpa had already arranged everything for me. Then I took out the jade pendant, the token the Chin family had given as a symbol of the engagement, and placed it on the table. Before old Master Chin could say anything, Wu Lijuan eagerly pulled out a jade bracelet wrapped in velvet from her pocket and handed it to me. She couldn't resist adding that from now on, I had absolutely nothing to do with her son Jianghui. I ignored her attitude, checked that it was indeed the Chu family's heirloom, and put it away. With everything settled, I politely declined the old man's invitation to stay for lunch and left. One less thing to worry about. Now, it was time for the real business. I had changed my appearance ahead of time and found a hidden spot to wait. Soon enough, I saw Sun Ruiming and Su Ayu slip into their usual meeting place, one after the other. Looking at Su Ayu, I honestly couldn't figure out what Sun Ruiming saw in her. She was decent looking, but nothing compared to the original girl. Her family was poor too. Her father was an ordinary worker at a steel plant, her mother a temporary cook at a textile factory cafeteria, and they had 5 children to feed. Maybe it was just a case of 2 terrible people finding each other. When Su Ayu spoke, I suddenly recognized her voice. She was the girl who had mocked me at Grandpa's funeral. So that's who it was. Once I confirmed the 2 of them were thoroughly wrapped up in each other, I slipped away quickly. I had prepared everything in advance. First, I ran to the neighborhood committee office down the street. Some young activists were just walking out, and I put on a panicked, breathless act, telling them that someone was doing something indecent in the abandoned courtyard in Feng Family Alley. They were outraged and took off running without even looking at who had reported it. Then I ran to the police station to report the same thing. I wanted to hit them from both sides and nail them to a wall of shame with no way out. Once I saw the police heading out too, I dusted off my hands and strolled toward the department store. I didn't need to watch to know how it would end. It wasn't that I didn't want to see their misery. I just had too many things to do before leaving for the countryside to waste time on them. As for Sun Ruiming and Su Ayu, their fate was exactly what you'd imagine. They were caught in the most compromising position possible, surrounded by a crowd. Su Ayu screamed when she realized what was happening, and the shock left Sun Ruiming completely frozen. He couldn't understand how they'd met here so many times without any trouble, yet today of all days they got caught. Before he could even try to make excuses, the crowd was on them. Still undressed, the 2 of them were beaten and cursed at viciously. It wasn't just the committee members. Bystanders joined in too, some venting their own frustrations, others taking advantage of the chaos. The humiliation was beyond anything they could have imagined. The beating finally stopped when the leader of the group worried they might actually kill someone. He told them to throw the 2 their clothes and drag them back for a public trial. As Sun Ruiming and Su Ayu were hauled out, a woman in the crowd recognized him and gasped. "Isn't that the Sun family's 3rd son?" She told people he was her neighbor, then took off running back to our street, pretending she was going to deliver the news out of neighborly duty. But the look on her face was pure delight at someone else's misfortune. She barely made it to the street corner before grabbing people and retelling the story with wild gestures and flying spit. Within no time, the news that Sun Ruiming had been caught in the act with a woman spread like wildfire through the neighborhood. Meanwhile, I was in an excellent mood, shopping at the department store. I used up all my industrial coupons buying 2 thermoses, 2 enamel basins, and 3 aluminum lunch boxes. I spent all my cloth tickets too, figuring supplies would be much harder to find in the countryside. Then I loaded up on malted milk powder, powdered milk, candy, assorted sweets, sugar, cookies, rubber shoes, soap, matches, and work gloves. By the time I was done, I had used up every ration ticket I had. Even if I didn't need everything myself, it would all come in handy after going to the countryside. Outside the store, I found a hidden spot, brought everything into my space, and came back out looking like a completely different person. I went back into the store and used the tickets I'd taken from the Sun family the night before to buy more supplies. I also bought plenty of non-ration premium candy and pastries. All of this was headed for a welfare home on the outskirts of the city. The original girl had visited this welfare home with Grandpa when she first came back to the capital. Some retired soldiers there had known Grandpa, and I wanted to pay them a visit while dropping off the donations. By the time I got off the bus with all my bags, it was nearly noon. I found a private spot, slipped into my space to change back to my normal appearance, then came out and ate some steamed buns I'd prepared. I sat under a tree to eat, since the welfare home was still about a mile away. Just as I was wondering how I'd carry everything that far, I spotted an ox cart slowly approaching. My eyes lit up. I wolfed down my buns, jumped up, and flagged down the old man driving the cart. I asked if he could take me to the welfare home. He looked at all my bags piled on the ground, checked how much room was left on the cart among the village passengers, and said it would cost 10 cents. The cart belonged to the village collective, and even villagers had to pay to ride it. The welfare home wasn't far, and it was extra income for the village. I agreed right away. The old man turned out to be very kind. When he heard I was visiting on behalf of my grandfather to see old revolutionary veterans, he helped carry my things all the way to the welfare home's front gate. Even with his help, I was exhausted. I made a mental note that getting this body into better physical shape needed to become a priority. The gatekeeper heard I was there to donate supplies and went inside to notify the person in charge. Soon someone came out to greet me. When he saw the pile of goods on the ground, he introduced himself as the director and thanked me warmly on behalf of everyone at the welfare home. After some polite greetings at the welfare home, someone came to carefully record all the donated supplies. I also gave them the leftover money from what I'd taken from the Sun family. Every last bit of it went to the welfare home. I explained that I was mainly there to visit my grandfather's old friends. The director kindly had someone lead me to them. When I found the old veterans, they were sitting around lost in their own thoughts. It made my heart ache. These were real heroes. Maybe it was the original girl's lingering feelings, but thinking of Grandpa made my eyes sting. I greeted them and asked if they remembered me. One of them recognized me right away and called me by name. I smiled and nodded. I decided not to tell them about Grandpa's death. Instead, I said he'd asked me to come visit on his behalf. I held up the gifts I'd bought with my own money and tickets, telling them these were from Grandpa. Their faces lit up. It had probably been a long time since anyone familiar had come to see them. One of the old men near the door stood up smiling, saying I'd grown so tall and pretty. We chatted for a long while. Then I noticed a caretaker nearby washing another elderly resident's hair, and I offered to help wash theirs while we talked. The caretaker was happy for the help, and the old men were clearly delighted. I brought over warm water, and we talked and laughed as I washed their hair. The room was filled with their hearty laughter. It touched me deeply. I promised myself that once I came back from the countryside, I'd visit them as often as I could. But I still had things to deal with and it was getting late, so I said goodbye. They watched me leave with reluctant eyes. Meanwhile, the Sun family's household had completely fallen apart. When Sun Ruiming's mother heard her son had been caught and arrested, she panicked and told Shiaan to run and find their father and brothers. Shiaan hadn't even made it out of the compound when their father, Sun Onsho, came rushing in, demanding to know what had happened and why his third son had been arrested. Shiaan was frantic. She knew that if her brother's offense was officially classified, the whole Sun family would be dragged down with him, and her own reputation would be ruined too. But she also knew dirty laundry shouldn't be aired in public. She told everyone to get inside first. The eldest brother Sun Jianming and the second brother Sun Aiming arrived right after. Shiaan told them the same thing, talk inside, not out here. They noticed neighbors peeking over at them and hurried indoors, heads down. The moment the door closed, the mother burst out that her son had been grabbed by the committee. The father rushed over and clamped his hand over her mouth, hissing at her to stop. Did she want to destroy the whole family? That snapped the mother out of her hysteria. She pulled his hand away and asked what they should do. The father told her to calm down and explain what happened first. White-faced and stammering, The mother repeated what she'd heard from the neighbors, but she didn't know the full details herself. Back at the Sun household, the father managed to stay calm despite the panic. He sent the eldest son out to gather information about what exactly happened, and told the second son to go find their uncle who had connections with the Revolutionary Committee. Maybe he could help suppress the whole thing. Then the father suddenly remembered me. He told Shiaan to run to my house and convince me to use my connections to get son Ruiming released. Shiaan slapped her forehead and said, "Right, how did we forget about her?" and rushed out. Once the kids were gone, the father told his wife to get some money ready. She didn't understand why at first, so he snapped at her. Even if someone could pull strings, they'd still need to grease some palms. Without bribes, son Ruiming would get beaten to a pulp in custody. The mother hated parting with money and argued that my powerful friends could handle it with just a word. But the father knew better and insisted. The mother grudgingly went to get their savings. Moments later, a scream tore through the house. "My money! Where's my money?" The father ran in. The mother was shrieking that someone had stolen everything. The neighbors gathered outside, whispering and gossiping. Some said the Sun family's bad luck was really piling up. The mother screamed for someone to call the police, saying they were ruined. The father couldn't believe it either. She was home all day. How could the money just vanish? The mother insisted she had taken 2 yuan out for son Ruiming just last night, and the money had definitely been there. The father completely lost his composure, yelling at her for being useless, then ran out of the house in a panic, only to find all the neighbors crowded at the door staring at him. Of course, I knew exactly where their money had gone. I had taken it all the night before. When I got back to our street, people everywhere were buzzing about the Sun family's disasters. I thought to myself, let's see if you still have time to scheme against other people now. As I approached my house, I spotted Shiaan pacing anxiously nearby. I tried to turn away, but she looked up and saw me. She ran over with a frantic expression, asking where I'd been. Since there was no avoiding her, I faced her directly and asked what she wanted. She didn't know how to bring it up. She glanced nervously at the neighbors watching us and mumbled that she needed a favor. I asked with feigned curiosity, what kind of favor? But even with all her nerve, Shiaan couldn't bring herself to say out loud, in front of the neighbors, that her brother had been caught with another woman and she wanted me to go rescue him. She asked if we could talk inside. I wasn't about to make things easy for Shiaan. I told her to say whatever she needed right here. I had things to do and wasn't going home just yet. Seeing her actually reminded me of something important, the original girl's job. I was about to leave for the countryside, and there was no way I was letting the Sun family keep that job. Shiaan was fuming inside, but had no choice. She lowered her voice and told me her brother had gotten into trouble and was being held. She asked if I could use my connections to get him released. I put on a shocked face and asked loudly, on purpose, what happened and why he was being detained. Her face turned pale, then green. She said it was all a misunderstanding and begged me not to ask questions, saying he was suffering in there. I laughed coldly inside. She wanted my help but wouldn't even tell me the truth. I told her that if I didn't know what happened, I couldn't ask anyone for favors. Since she didn't want to explain, she should find someone else. She panicked and cried out, asking how I could just ignore her brother. I looked at her with a half smile and asked, "Why should I care? What is your brother to me?" That left her completely speechless. She realized that because Grandpa had never approved of son Ruiming, the Sun family had always kept our relationship secret to avoid looking like they were scheming for Chu family assets. Son Ruiming only ever visited my house under the excuse of seeing Shiaan. Even if she told people now that her brother and I were together, nobody would believe it. They'd just think she was bullying an orphan. That was exactly what I wanted. By cutting ties publicly in front of all the neighbors, there would be no way for the Sun family to use me again. I said I had things to do, and walked away. By the time Shiaan snapped out of her daze, I was already gone, leaving her surrounded by the neighbors' gossip and mocking looks. Meanwhile, somewhere else in the city, a jeep pulled up outside a small courtyard. A middle-aged man in a black suit and leather shoes stepped out, looked around carefully, and walked inside. He went straight to the main room where a man called Sun Lalu greeted him eagerly. The visitor spoke in a low voice, asking if everything was arranged. Sun Lalu assured him it was all taken care of. The man's eyes turned sharp, warning him not to play any tricks. If anything went wrong tonight, Sun Lalu and his people would be finished in the capital. Sun Lalu nodded nervously and promised he wouldn't dare disobey. After the man left, a younger gang member asked Sun Lalu who that intimidating visitor was. Sun Lalu glared at him and snapped, "Don't ask questions you shouldn't be asking." Then he told another man to send someone to keep watch and make sure nothing went wrong. It seemed someone had hired these thugs to do something tonight, and I had a feeling it involved me. Later, I made my way to a familiar courtyard. A girl named Wei Hongyan was cooking in the yard and was surprised and happy to see me. Her mother smacked her on the back of the head for asking silly questions instead of inviting me inside. This was my first visit since Grandpa's passing, and Wei's mother felt sorry for me. She could tell from the timing of my visit that I might be dealing with something difficult and warmly urged me to come in. Wei's mother took over the cooking from her daughter and invited me to stay for dinner. But every family was tight on food these days, so I couldn't accept. I told her I had something important to discuss. Wei's mother could tell from my expression it was serious. She had always been grateful to Grandpa. Years ago, he had saved her husband's leg from being amputated. She quickly handed the spatula to her younger son, Manhwa, telling him to finish up and pulled me inside. I didn't mention the Sun family's schemes. I didn't want the whole world knowing about that. Instead, I told them that after Grandpa's passing, the house was full of painful memories and I wanted a change of scenery, so I had signed up to go to the countryside. Wei's mother's eyes went wide. She couldn't believe it and asked if I understood how hard life was out there. I reassured her it was just temporary and that I'd come back eventually. She calmed down a bit, but still poked me on the forehead. She truly treated me like family. Then she asked why I was really here. I looked at Hong Yen and brought up the real issue. According to policy, if Hong Yen couldn't find a job by the end of the month, she'd have to go to the countryside too. Both mother and daughter looked worried. They knew the deadline was coming. I got straight to the point and asked if they were interested in my job. They both stared at me. They knew my adoptive mother had left me a job position, which was also my ticket to return to the city someday. Wei's mother immediately waved her hands and said I couldn't give up that job. Without it, how would I ever come back? I patted her hand and told her honestly that a lot of people already had their eyes on my job, and I'd rather go to someone I trusted than let the wrong people benefit. As for returning to the city, Grandpa's friends and my father's connections would help me when the time came. Hearing me say that, the mother and daughter were moved but conflicted. Still, given the choice between staying in the city and suffering in the countryside, no one would choose the harder path. Wei's mother asked one more time if I was sure. I reminded her that she'd seen the important people at Grandpa's funeral. She knew they weren't ordinary. She understood and stopped hesitating, saying they'd take the job and remember this kindness forever. I playfully scolded her for being so formal, reminding her that she and Hong Yen had helped me plenty before. Wei's mother, being straightforward, asked if 800 yuan would be a fair price. It wasn't that she didn't want to offer more. She'd actually need to borrow some of it, but the going rate for a permanent job position was around 700. I thought the price was honest and fair, so I agreed. I also gave them a heads up about Shiaan currently filling in at the position as a temporary substitute. I wanted them to be prepared, because once Shiaan found out the job was going to someone else, she was definitely going to lose her mind. Wei's mother and Hong Yen quickly understood the situation with the Sun family. Wei's mother wasn't worried. She said she wasn't afraid of them. I turned down their dinner invitation, and we agreed to go handle the job transfer paperwork the day after tomorrow. I didn't say tomorrow, because the Wei family needed time to gather the money. Plus, the moment I showed up with Hong Yen to do the official transfer, Xiaoyan's temporary position would be over. I also wanted some peace and quiet before going to the countryside, and I liked the idea of giving Shiaan a nice surprise. When I got home, Shiaan was gone from my gate. I went inside, ate some vegetable buns I'd packed earlier from a state-run restaurant, and planned to rest until nightfall, when I had more business to take care of. Meanwhile, the Sun family was sitting around their house, looking miserable. The eldest brother's wife flatly refused to borrow money to bail out son Ruiming, saying he had brought this on himself. The second brother's wife agreed, pointing out that even if they spent everything they had, the outcome would still be bad, and they had too many mouths to feed to risk it all. The mother exploded, calling her daughters-in-law heartless. She demanded to know where her son stood. The eldest brother grabbed his hair in frustration and said it wasn't that they didn't want to help. They simply had nothing left to help with. The second brother suggested they try asking me again. Shiaan was torn. My cold attitude earlier that day had scared her. She wanted to save her brother, but she was afraid that if she pushed me too hard, I might get angry and take back the job, not just the permanent position, but even her temporary substitute role. The mother reminded everyone that based on what Shiaan had reported, I clearly already knew why son Ruiming had been arrested and wasn't willing to help. The father, looking grim, insisted they had to try anyway. They couldn't just watch their son be destroyed. They had two options: scrape together 500 yuan to bribe someone, or get me to use my connections. Either way, they had to act fast, or son Ruiming wouldn't just lose his job, he'd be publicly condemned. Before they could do anything, Chu Yuyi's family showed up at their door. Not wanting to cause a scene outside, they walked straight in. The mother looked down on the Su family, but had to hold her tongue given the situation. Chu Yuyi's father came in with a cold face and said that if they didn't act soon, the Sun family's son would face serious punishment. It turned out that a relative of the Su family had connections with the Revolutionary Committee. His original plan had been to have Chu Yunyi claim she was a victim and pin all the blame on son Ruiming. But that plan fell apart when they discovered Chu Yunyi was already pregnant with son Ruiming's child. So the father had pulled strings and told the committee that the two were in a relationship and about to get married. They had just gotten carried away. That story had managed to calm things down somewhat. The mother anxiously asked where son Ruiming was and why he hadn't come back with them. Chu Yuyi's father looked embarrassed as he explained that since the two had been caught red-handed, they'd have to go through a mandatory ideological education session before being released the next day. The Sun family was relieved. At least they didn't need to borrow money or beg anyone for help. The two families agreed that as soon as son Ruiming and Chu Yunyi were released, they'd arrange a quick wedding. But they relaxed too soon. I had no intention of letting them off that easily. Right after setting things in motion earlier, I'd found a public phone and called Huawanqing. He had already been investigating the Su family, so this was perfect timing. He made one phone call and let things take their natural course. Whatever deal the two families had struck, it wouldn't hold for long. That evening, while waiting for nightfall to go out and handle more business, I couldn't resist my curiosity about the space any longer. I locked up the house and slipped inside. First, I checked on my watermelon seeds. The ones watered with the well water had already sprouted to half a finger's height, while the ones with regular tap water showed almost no change. That told me the well water was incredibly powerful and needed to be used carefully. Then I walked over to the stone house. To my surprise, the stone door opened on its own as I approached, which startled me, but I'd had special abilities before and quickly accepted it. Inside, the place was breathtaking. The main room was furnished entirely with rosewood furniture in an elegant antique style. A display shelf along the back wall held porcelain pieces that were clearly worth a fortune. To the east was a bedroom separated by a curtain of fine silk brocade, and to the west was a study separated by strings of pearls. Below the display shelf were cabinets filled with exquisite tea sets and wine sets. The bedroom had a gorgeous rosewood canopy bed, vanity, wardrobe, and table and chairs. The wardrobe was full of beautiful ancient-style outfits, all perfectly matched with accessories and shoes. The vanity drawers were filled with jewelry, every piece clearly crafted by master artisans. The study was made entirely of Wangwali wood, another precious timber. The bookshelves were packed with books, and the cabinets below held fine brushes, ink, and paper. On the desk sat two jade mountain-shaped paperweights, a fine inkstone, and a rack of calligraphy brushes. In the center of the desk lay a jade tablet with a note underneath reading, "Those with fate shall naturally merge." Before I could react, the jade tablet flew straight into the space between my eyebrows. It took me a while to recover. From the jade tablet, I learned this place was called the Spirit Stone Space. Every different colored stone in the space had unique properties, Blue stones could cool temperatures. Certain stones could resist radiation. Yellow-green warming stones relieved fatigue. Green cold stones could strengthen the immune system. Lapis lazuli could enhance spiritual awareness. White crystals could purify the mind. Purple crystals could improve focus and memory. Rose stones could boost charm and improve relationships. Turquoise could promote cell regeneration and attract wealth. Garnet could strengthen vitality and confidence. Yellow crystals could calm emotions and bring unexpected fortune. And smoky quartz could speed up wound healing and restore youth. And the spirit spring in the pavilion's well could detoxify the body, enhance beauty, boost the effectiveness of medicine, accelerate plant growth, and amplify the powers of all the stones when they were soaked in it. My eyes were practically glowing. I had thought this space was disappointing at first, just a bunch of rocks. But it turned out to be an absolute treasure. I could practically retire on this. Behind the main room, I found a fully equipped kitchen with one large stove, two small ones, and every cooking tool imaginable. Behind that was a storage room packed with gold, silver, jade, porcelain, silk, and fine fabrics, all neatly organized. The room looked small but seemed to hold far more than it should. There had to be some kind of magical formation, expanding the space inside. On the other side was a natural hot spring pool. It connected to the bedroom through a hidden stone door I'd missed earlier. Remembering the spirit spring's abilities, I grabbed a porcelain bowl from the kitchen and went to the well. I scooped out half a bowl and took a tiny sip. It was refreshingly sweet. I drank the rest in one gulp. Nothing hurt, but just when I was losing patience, a grayish-brown sticky substance started oozing from my skin, toxins being flushed out of my body. The smell was unbearable. I rushed out of the space, grabbed clean clothes from the house, then went back in and headed straight for the hot spring pool. The moment I sank into the warm water, a wave of comfort washed over me. This pool clearly had restorative properties too. I couldn't help but marvel at my incredible luck. As I soaked in the hot spring, the grimy toxins on my skin dissolved and disappeared on their own. I was thrilled. My skin had become noticeably fairer and smoother. But I couldn't linger. I had serious business tonight. I cleaned up, got dressed, and left the space. The other features of the space could wait until I was in the countryside. Right now, I still had too much to do before leaving. It was fully dark outside. I locked up and headed out. I'd learned from Gu Peiyan where the Shin family lived, the people responsible for Grandpa's death. I was going to pay them a visit before leaving the city. They should be grateful this was the modern era, with rule of law. If this had been the ancient dynasty I'd transmigrated to in a past life, I would have wiped out their entire family tonight. I couldn't kill anyone for revenge now, but I could still make them pay. But shortly after leaving, I sensed someone following me. I kept calm and headed toward a crowded area to figure out how many there were. Who would be tailing a lone orphan girl like me? I found a small public square where people were out for evening walks and cooling off. I weaved through the crowd and identified 3 men following me. The original girl's body was actually in decent shape. She'd grown up in a military compound where her adoptive parents had her do morning runs with the other kids. Her adoptive father had even taught her some basic martial arts, though she didn't have the talent for it. Once I recovered my own skills in this body, that training history would make a convenient cover story. After confirming there were 3 of them, I walked straight into a narrow alley. The men were pleased, thinking a dark alley made their job easier. Just one little girl against 3 of them. But the moment I entered the alley, I sped up, jumped, and climbed onto a courtyard wall. When they followed, I was gone. The tall, skinny one cursed. The fat one wondered if I'd spotted them. The 3rd one, who seemed to be in charge, told them to split up and search, then meet back at the same spot. Once they separated, I took a shortcut along the rooftops and caught up with the fat one. I dropped down behind him and asked, "Looking for me?" He froze when he saw me. Before he could yell for help, I grabbed him in a hold and warned him that if he made a sound, I'd send him to the afterlife. He couldn't believe a girl had overpowered him. To be safe, I hit several pressure points on his body, then demanded to know who sent them. He stayed quiet at first, hoping his friends would come rescue him. So I punched him hard in the stomach, doubling him over like a shrimp. He broke immediately, begging me to stop and promising to talk. I let go and warned him not to try anything or he'd regret it for the rest of his life. Terrified, he told me their boss had taken payment from someone named Du Sanha to follow me. I'd never heard that name before. The fat man, gasping in pain and terrified I'd hit him again, explained that Du Sanha worked for old Master Shin of the Shin family in the capital. So it was the Shin family. My suspicion was confirmed. I asked coldly, "What did he tell you to do to me?" The fat man didn't want to talk, but when I ran my finger across his neck in a threatening gesture, he cracked and confessed everything. They'd been hired to hand me over to human traffickers. My face went cold. Hua Wanqing was right about the Shin family. They were capable of anything, no matter how low. Going after a young orphan girl like this was despicable. If anything, this made me even more determined to make the Shin family pay. Just then, the other two men came back from their search. Before I could figure out what to do with all three of them, I heard chaotic footsteps at the alley entrance. A tall man came running in, clutching his arm. Thanks to the spirit spring water I'd drunk, my senses were sharper now, and with my medical knowledge from 2 past lives, I could smell blood in the air even from a distance. I had important things to do tonight and didn't want to get involved in someone else's trouble. But as I turned to leave, the fat man grabbed me and shouted, "She's here." I caught her. That shout drew everyone's attention. Multiple groups started closing in. There was no getting away quietly now. Fine. I'd just have to adapt. Within seconds, the fat man's 2 partners arrived. The wounded man reached us at the same time, and right behind him came 5 men chasing him. The fat man immediately let go of me, trying to play innocent and saying it was all a misunderstanding. But these 5 newcomers radiated killing intent. Their leader made a hand signal and said coldly, "Don't let a single one escape." I frowned. What terrible luck. I really should have checked my horoscope before going out tonight. Before the 3 thugs could react, the 5 men attacked. If I didn't fight, I'd be killed along with everyone else. I shoved the fat man into an attacker to buy myself a second, then used the darkness as cover to pull a melon-cutting knife from my space kitchen with my mind. Without hesitation, I slashed at the hand reaching for me. The man screamed. He hadn't expected that at all. Everyone froze. The leader's eyes turned icy, and he asked what happened. His man snarled that I had a knife. The leader's face twisted with vicious contempt. "Then what are you waiting for? Finish her off." He assumed his man had just been careless. A little girl with a knife was nothing to worry about for men who lived by the blade every day. But those words lit a fire in me. Finish me off? They had no idea who they were dealing with. All hesitation vanished. I struck fast, several slashes in quick succession, each one drawing blood, but carefully placed to wound without killing. The men were so stunned by my speed they couldn't even cry for help before dropping to their knees. With them down, I turned my attention to the leader. He'd ordered his men to kill me. That was something I intended to answer personally. I caught the leader off guard and slashed him from behind. When he spun around, I cut him again on his side, then shouted at the man they'd been chasing to run. He seemed shocked that I'd not only saved myself, but helped him too. But he wasn't the type to abandon someone who'd rescued him. Despite his injured arm, he pulled a short knife from his boot and went after the leader, who was about to attack me. With the leader caught between us, I got another strike in, then grabbed the wounded man's hand and pulled him into a nearby alley. We'd only run a few dozen meters before the remaining men started chasing us. I was worried if they caught up, the trouble would only multiply. Then, rounding a corner, I spotted a narrow gap between 2 buildings. Without giving the man time to react, I shoved him into the gap. I told him I didn't know what kind of people he'd angered, but he'd dragged me into this mess too. I pushed him deeper into the crevice and said, "This is all I can do for you. Whether you live or die is up to your luck now." Just as our pursuers were about to round the corner, I took off running in the opposite direction, making sure they saw me turn another corner. It was too dark for them to count how many people were running, so they all chased after me, leaving the wounded man hidden. I deliberately led them farther away before ducking around a corner and slipping into my space. They lost me completely. They circled the area cursing for a long time and even came back several times to check before finally giving up. The man I'd hidden survived. His own people found him shortly after I'd drawn the pursuers away, though he passed out from blood loss before he could say anything. Once the coast was clear, I left my space and hurried off. Those people and their fight had nothing to do with me. Even if they track me down somehow, good luck finding me in the countryside. But the Shin family's attempt to have me sold to human traffickers, that I would not forget. Tonight, old Master Shin was getting a lesson. I took the last bus to the Shin family's neighborhood and found their compound using the address Gu Peiyan had given me. I didn't linger at the front gate. It was still relatively early and people were going in and out of the compound. This wasn't some small household. I needed to be careful. I scouted the area, then found a hidden spot near the back gate and slipped into my space to rest and recharge before making my move. Inside the Shun estate, old Master Shin was in his study practicing calligraphy. After finishing his last stroke, he turned to his subordinate and asked, "Any news yet?" What I didn't know at the time was that inside the Shin estate, Du Sanha was reporting to old Master Shin. He told the old man that his men were moving on me tonight. Then he added with a cruel smile that he'd given them a little hint. By now, I was probably already in the hands of human traffickers. He planned to leak false information the day after tomorrow, making it look like I had run away to avoid going to the countryside. That way, even if the Hua family tried to intervene, it would be too late. The scandal wouldn't just ruin my reputation, it would tarnish Grandpa's name even in death. Old Master Shin sneered coldly. He said Grandpa had crossed him too many times, and this was the price. He wanted to see just how far the Hua family would really go to protect one little orphan girl. He told Du Sanha to have the thugs lay low afterward so the Hua and Gu families couldn't trace anything back to them. Du Sanha assured him he'd already arranged hiding places for everyone. The old man nodded approvingly, saying he trusted Du Sanha completely. Meanwhile, at the Hua household, old Master Hua was waiting anxiously in the courtyard for his son. When Hua Wanqing came home, the old man demanded to know what was going on. Hua Wanqing tried to get him inside first, but the old man slammed his cane on the ground and insisted on hearing it immediately. So, Hua Wanqing explained everything about me, that I wanted to leave the capital for a while, and he could tell I was serious about it, so he'd agreed to help. He reassured his father that I was a smart girl with clear plans, and the moment I wanted to come back, he'd arrange everything. Old Master Hua understood my reasons. Being surrounded by painful memories was hard. But he insisted that Hua Wanqing personally call ahead to the place where I'd be sent, to make sure I wouldn't be mistreated. Hua Wanqing told him not to worry. A former military captain who'd served under him was now the commune secretary there, and he'd already made arrangements. Then the old man's face darkened as he brought up the Sun family. He ordered his son to handle them personally. Grandpa had died because of the Hua family's affairs, and they couldn't fail to protect even his granddaughter. Hua Wanqing's eyes flashed cold. He said everything was already in motion, and there should be news by tomorrow morning. As for me, I wasn't wasting time in my space. I had planned to explore more of its features, but thinking about how weak this body's fighting skills were, I pushed my curiosity aside. I drank a cup of spirit spring water and spent hours training intensively, drawing on the combat experience from my previous 2 lives. I kept at it until late at night, when the Shun compound finally went quiet. Stepping out of my space, I was pleased to find that between the spirit spring water and my past life muscle memory, just a few hours of hard training had gotten me to a point where I could handle ordinary opponents in a fight. Internal energy cultivation would take much longer, but that could wait. Tonight, I had other business to attend to. Thinking about everything the Shun family had done, indirectly killing Grandpa, and then targeting me just because Grandpa had saved their political enemy, I was furious. People like them were a menace to society. Since I couldn't kill them, I'd settle for making them live in constant fear. I was about to sneak in through the spot I'd scouted earlier when I heard footsteps and the sound of a cart's wheels. I quickly hid behind a tree near the back gate. 2 men, one tall, one short, appeared pushing a cart. The back gate opened from inside, and someone scolded them for being late. The tall one, called Xuanzi, explained in a low voice that the Dong family had been difficult, so it took longer than expected. On the cart sat 3 wooden crates, 2 large and 1 small. The man inside was addressed as Uncle Du Sonha, the Shin family's right-hand man. Xuanzi told him the small crate was a gift for him personally. They pushed the cart inside, then left, saying they'd come back for it the next afternoon. I decided to follow these 2 instead of entering the compound right away. As they walked, the short one called Zhong bragged about using a share of the money to send a bride price to some girl's family, so her mother would stop looking down on him. Xuanzi warned him to be careful. The money came from shady sources and could get them in trouble. Hearing this made me even angrier at the Shin family. These people were clearly involved in something criminal. I followed them for about 15 minutes until they entered a courtyard. Someone inside called them in, saying their boss was waiting. Then someone told another man called Guzzi to close the gate. I slipped into the alley beside the compound and spotted a poplar tree near the wall. I climbed up, but the moment I reached the top, I saw a half-grown dog inside the yard. I had to stop. Just as I was about to climb back down and find another way in, I noticed the front gate hadn't been shut properly. Guzzi must have figured the dog was guard enough. Right then, the dog spotted me and started barking wildly. I dropped down from the wall and waited. Someone came out of the house, found nothing suspicious, and yelled at the dog to shut up. The dog whimpered and slunk back to the gate. By now I'd circled around to the front. The dog, lying by the gap in the gate, suddenly lifted its head and poked its nose through the opening. In a flash, I reached out, touched its head, and pulled the dog straight into my space. The gate was open just wide enough for me to squeeze through, so I slipped inside the courtyard. I headed toward the lit room and heard the boss giving instructions, telling his men to take their share and leave, and to stay alert over the coming days. When I heard them getting up to go, I ducked into my space instantly. Once it was quiet, I came back out and listened again. 2 men were still talking inside. One asked if the guy sent to deal with me had returned yet. The other scoffed. How hard could it be to handle one little girl? Then the first explained who I actually was. The granddaughter of the old Chu doctor who had jumped in front of Gu Peiyan when they'd been sent to intercept the Gu family. So this confirmed everything. These were the same people the Shun family had used to attack Grandpa's group, and now Du Sanha wanted to pull out the roots by getting rid of me too. Then the conversation took an interesting turn. One of them said they'd done too many terrible things for the Shin family over the years, and sooner or later it would catch up with them. The room went quiet for a long moment before the boss, Sun Laolu, spoke. He said that was exactly why he'd been so generous with everyone tonight. The Shin family was becoming more reckless and crossing every line. He wanted to cut ties secretly and get out. He told his trusted man to catalog everything they'd stored in the cellar that night, then find an excuse to give everyone a few days off. During that time, they'd move everything out. He said those goods were enough for the 2 of them to live comfortably for the rest of their lives. He also had a bad feeling that something big was coming and wanted to quit while they still could. After giving his instructions, Sun Laolu left to see his mistress. The remaining man went to close the gate and called for the dog. Where did that stupid mutt run off to? Then he locked up and went to bed. I had to admit, Sun Laolu had sharp instincts, even if he wasn't a good person. Once the lights went out, I crept to the back of the compound. After searching for a while, I found the cellar entrance hidden in a storage shed. A heavy millstone sat on top of the trapdoor. I pulled it into my space. Without the space, moving that thing would have been nearly impossible, which explained why they felt so secure. I lifted the wooden cover, grabbed the flashlight I'd stored in my space earlier, and climbed down. What I found was staggering. This wasn't just a cellar, it was a full underground room, packed to the ceiling with stolen goods. No wonder Sun Laolu said it was enough for a lifetime, it was enough for several. Since I was already here, I wasn't leaving empty-handed. I took half the crates into my space, then climbed back out and put everything back exactly the way it was. I hold grudges. These men were the Shin family's attack dogs. They had helped carry out the ambush that killed Grandpa. There was no way I was letting them walk away with everything. I climbed over the back wall and disappeared into the night. By the time I got back to the Shin estate, all the lights were out. Earlier when I'd scouted the place, I'd noticed the first and second courtyards had lights, but the third courtyard in the back was completely dark, which made it the perfect place to start. I climbed over the back wall into the third courtyard. It was made up of several smaller guest courtyards, and even though they were called guest quarters, they were furnished far better than most people's actual homes. I didn't have time to browse. Anything my hand touched vanished straight into my space. Within minutes, all 3 guest courtyards were stripped completely bare. That's right, I was going to clean the Shin family out entirely. Let them live in shock and confusion. Whether they reported it to the police or swallowed their loss in silence, that was their problem. Ideally, I'd find some evidence along the way that could help the Hua and Gu families take them down for good. Thanks to the spirit spring water, my senses were incredibly sharp now. As I headed toward the second courtyard, I noticed something odd near the ornamental gate. A hidden mechanism. The cart from earlier was parked nearby, and I understood immediately. Most wealthy families hide their secret rooms in obscure locations, but the Shin family had put theirs right in plain sight. Clever, but tonight they'd met me. However, opening the mechanism would make noise that could echo through the quiet night, so I left it alone for now. The gate to the second courtyard was locked, so I went over the wall. One of the smaller courtyards inside was unoccupied, so I swept it clean first. In the next one, I pressed sleep pressure points on the residents before clearing out everything. After checking that nothing was amiss, I moved to the last small courtyard in the second section. But after emptying all of these, I still hadn't found Shin Chongyang himself. He had to be in the front courtyard. Looking at the unconscious Shin family members I'd left on the floor, I felt no guilt. They were his descendants. They'd enjoyed wealth gained through his despicable methods. They could share the consequences too. Then I remembered seeing a needle stuck in a sewing machine cushion in one of the rooms, and an idea formed. But when I checked my space mentally, I was confused. I'd expected all the stolen goods to be piled up on the open ground between the stones, but the space looked exactly the same as before, just colorful rocks everywhere. Puzzled, I entered the space and looked around. Then it hit me. I headed to the stone house. Sure enough, in the storage room at the back, everything I'd collected was neatly organized on shelves, sorted by category, all on its own. This confirmed that not just the house but the entire space had been set up with some kind of magical formation. And apparently it had an automatic sorting function. I was thrilled. I'd been planning to spend hours organizing everything later to decide what to sell and what to donate. The space had done it all for me. I grabbed the needle from the sewing machine and left the space. Then I went back to the unconscious Shin family members in both courtyards and pricked each of them with the needle in specific spots. Since they were part of the Shin family, they could share in the family's fortunes and misfortunes alike. According to Gu Peiyan, none of them were good people. They'd been throwing the Shin family's weight around and bullying others for years. A little payback was well-deserved. I moved from the second courtyard into the front courtyard, which had a different layout, no dividing walls between sections. I started with 2 empty rooms, then moved to the east and west wing rooms. Based on my experience from past lives, these would house the Shin family's bodyguards and enforcers. The east wing held ordinary people, but the ones in the west wing were clearly trained fighters. I cleared out the east wing without trouble, but as I approached the west wing, someone inside stirred. He whispered to his roommate to wake up, saying he heard something outside. The other man grumbled that it was the middle of the night, rolled over, and started snoring again. I cursed myself for not preparing some knockout drugs beforehand. Before I could decide my next move, I heard the alert one get out of bed and tiptoe toward the door. I quickly hid behind a potted plant nearby. When he stepped outside and hadn't spotted me yet, I punched him hard on the back of the head. I didn't have time for drawn-out confrontations. Even if Gu Peiyan's account had some bias, what I'd overheard tonight from those thugs confirmed the Shin family deserved everything I was doing. I stuck the needle into him at several points, then went inside and pressed sleep pressure points on the snoring man before giving him the needle treatment too. The furnishings here weren't as fancy as the main rooms, but I cleaned everything out anyway. On my way out, I pressed sleep pressure points on the knocked-out man too, just to be safe. He was clearly professionally trained. If he'd seen me first, I might have been in real danger given my current physical condition. Tonight had been riskier than I'd planned. Inside their room, I'd found 2 guns. Ordinary people didn't have those. These men were definitely Shin family enforcers. Now only the main house remained. I cleared out the living room first, then headed for the study. The study door was bolted from inside with a reinforced lock, but a window was open with only a screen. I poked a hole through the screen, reached in, and climbed through. The study was large, divided into an outer and inner room. In the moonlight, I saw a group photo on the bookshelf and immediately recognized Shin Chongyang from Gu Peiyen's description. To avoid bumping into furniture in the dark, I collected everything as I walked. By the time I reached the inner room's door, the entire study was empty except for the bookshelves against the wall. The person sleeping inside was alert. He called out, asking who was there. I wasn't nervous at all. Just from his aged voice, I knew this was Shin Chongyang himself, the man behind Grandpa's death. Overconfident, he actually opened the door. Years of doing terrible things had made him paranoid enough to keep a loaded gun, but he overestimated himself and underestimated me. The instant he stepped out, I kicked the gun from his hand. Before he could react, I threw a teacup at the lamp and shattered the bulb. Shin Chongyang never saw who attacked him. He was swallowed by darkness. Despite his age, Shin Chongyang was no pushover. We fought for dozens of rounds before he finally ran out of stamina and went down. He managed to ask one question, "Who are you?" before I knocked him unconscious. Then I gave him special attention with my needle. After what I did, he would never speak again for the rest of his life. Having lived through multiple past lives, I never show mercy to enemies. I also crippled both his hands permanently. He could spend the rest of his days as a living corpse. By the time someone found him the next morning, no doctor on earth could undo what I'd done. I felt zero sympathy. This man had probably caused countless deaths. I was simply delivering justice. After clearing out the inner room and collecting the gun I'd kicked away earlier, I started on the bookshelves. Behind one of them, I found a hidden compartment, not surprising for someone like him. It was fairly large, and I swept everything inside into my space without stopping to examine it. The secret room by the second courtyard gate was still waiting. I went back to the ornamental gate and found the mechanism hidden beneath a door stone. When I triggered it, the entrance didn't open nearby. Instead, a section of wall several meters away slid open. The wall had been built as a double layer, perfectly concealed behind the courtyard door when it stood open. Stone steps led down to 2 small underground chambers, both packed full of valuables. I was certain this wasn't the Shin family's only stash, which made me feel even less guilty about taking every last item. I restored the mechanism, climbed over the wall, pulled a bicycle from my space, one I'd collected from the Shin estate, and rode home. It took over an hour. With only one day left before leaving for the countryside, I had so much to do. I went straight into my space, soaked in the hot spring to wash away my exhaustion, then went to examine what I'd taken from Shin Chongyang's hidden compartment. What I found made my heart race. There were several account books documenting the Shin family's dirty dealings, evidence of most of their crimes laid out in black and white. On top of that, there were 2 small boxes of gold bars, a box of premium jade, and 3 property deeds, including one for the Shin family compound itself. This was enough to bring down the entire Shin family. I deliberately hadn't touched the items in the 2 properties listed on the other deeds. When the authorities investigated, those places would still be full of stolen goods, physical proof that couldn't be denied. Even if the Shin family woke up and reported a robbery, the sheer volume of ill-gotten wealth in their other locations would make it look like they were trying to play tricks. Since I had more than enough evidence, I needed to get it to the right people quickly. I left the house one more time and headed straight to the Hua family's compound. I didn't show myself. Instead, I wrote a letter with a brush pen, bundled it with the account books and the 3 property deeds, and tossed everything over the wall into their courtyard. In the letter, I described the location of Sun Lalio's hideout and its cellar, and warned the Hua family not to act directly themselves. Better to let the Shin family's other enemies make the move. That way, the Shin family couldn't retaliate against the Hua family specifically. I would have preferred to give the evidence directly to the Gu family, so the Hua family could stay out of it, but I didn't know where the Gu family lived. The Hua family would have to handle it. I'd done everything I could. Grandpa and the original girl had been avenged. From now on, I just needed to focus on living my own life well. By the time I got home, dawn was breaking. I set an alarm and collapsed into bed. At the Hua house, old Master Hua was an early riser with a morning exercise habit. When he stepped outside, he spotted the package in the courtyard. He cautiously poked it open with his cane, and when he saw what was inside, his eyes went wide. His first thought was whether someone had planted it as a trap. He brought everything to the study and called Hua Wanqing and his grandsons to discuss. Hua Wanqing examined the account books carefully and said they looked authentic. Nobody would spend years forging fake ledgers just to frame the Shin family. The eldest grandson wondered why the evidence had been dropped at their house. The second grandson, Hua Shengming, suggested they bring in the Gu family to verify everything, since the Gu family had been battling the Shin family for years and would recognize their dealings. He added that they couldn't afford to delay. Any hesitation would give the Shin family time to react. Old Master Hua agreed, and Hua Wanqing decided to go in person rather than risk making a phone call through an operator. Meanwhile, my alarm dragged me out of a deep sleep. I was so exhausted, I nearly drifted off again with the clock still in my hand. But with only one day left before leaving, I forced myself up. After a quick meal, I went to the neighborhood committee office for my adoptive mother's rental property and arranged for them to send the rent payments to me each quarter. That went smoothly. Then I headed to the department store. My space was still mostly empty, and what I'd bought yesterday wouldn't last me until I returned to the city. Among the things I'd taken from the Shin estate were plenty of ration tickets, mostly local ones that would be useless in the countryside. Since I had money to spare, I might as well convert everything into supplies now and make my life in the countryside more comfortable. I spent the entire morning running from place to place, spending every last ticket. My space was now well stocked, and I felt much more at ease. Staying away from home also meant avoiding the Sun family, not because I was afraid of them, but because dealing with them was just annoying. I ate lunch at a state-run restaurant near home, then headed to the Wei family's house. But the moment I walked into their courtyard, I heard a commotion. Someone was arguing with Wei's mother, saying something about how even though their two families knew each other well, marriage was a lifelong matter, and the young couple couldn't be expected to start married life without even having their own room. When I arrived at the Wei family's courtyard, a group of neighborhood aunties were crowded around eavesdropping on an argument inside. I asked what was going on. One of them eagerly explained that the Wei family's eldest son had found a girlfriend and they were planning to marry next month. But the canned food factory where he worked couldn't provide housing, so the Wei family wanted to split the brother's room in half, the newlyweds in the inner section and the youngest brother in the outer part. The bride's family, the Chung family, wasn't having it. Someone chimed in with a snarky comment that the arrangement would make things awkward for the couple, since an underage brother-in-law would be sleeping right on the other side of the wall. From what Hong Yan had told me before, the Chung family were reasonable people, not the type to cause trouble without good reason. Then I heard the bride's mother suggest that instead of squeezing everyone together, they should rent a room somewhere as a proper wedding home. The room went silent. After a long pause, Wei's father admitted they'd thought of that too, but every house in the neighborhood was packed full and nobody wanted strangers moving in. That gave me an idea. I hadn't planned on renting out the Chu family house since I'd be coming back in a couple of years, and I worried about tenants not taking care of it. But renting to the Wei or Chung families was different. They were trustworthy people who wouldn't refuse to leave later. It would also save Wei's mother the trouble of checking on an empty house for me, since unoccupied homes deteriorated quickly. But I kept quiet for now. Too many people had their eyes on my house, so it was better to discuss this privately. After the Chung family left and the gossipers scattered, Wei's mother turned around and spotted me. She suddenly remembered our appointment and apologized, saying she'd almost forgotten because of the wedding drama. I smiled and told her I'd just arrived. She pulled me inside. Moments later, Hong Yan burst in, out of breath. She'd been sent to borrow money from an aunt and had heard about the Chung family's visit on her way back. She was clearly anxious. Spending a large sum on buying my job right when her brother needed money for his wedding made her feel terribly guilty. She was afraid that if she didn't get the job, she'd be sent to the countryside, but she was equally afraid of ruining her brother's marriage. Then Wei's father came in. He nodded at me and said he'd heard about the job arrangement from his wife. He asked if I wanted to reconsider, since without the job I'd have no easy way to return to the city. I waved him off firmly and told him there was no need to reconsider. Let's just go handle the paperwork now. I was leaving for the countryside tomorrow. With my mind made up, Wei's mother quietly asked Hongyan if she'd gotten the money. Hongyan opened her military-style satchel and handed it over. Wei's mother went to the back room and came out with the full amount. She said she wouldn't waste time on empty pleasantries. Here was 800 yuan, count it. I appreciated their straightforwardness, so I counted it right in front of them. It was exactly right. I suggested we go handle the paperwork immediately. Hongyan looked relieved but also sad, knowing I was leaving tomorrow. She thanked me, but I held up the money and told her it was a fair deal. No thanks needed. To avoid attracting attention from the nosy neighbors in their compound, I told them I'd go home first to put the money away and we'd meet at the alley entrance. Once I was out of the compound, I simply put the money into my space and headed straight to the meeting point. The job transfer went smoothly. But the moment Hongyan's paperwork was official, Xiaoyan's temporary position was automatically terminated. To avoid anyone accusing me of doing things behind her back, I went to tell Xiaoyan in person at the hospital pharmacy, where she was working. It wasn't busy, so Xiaoyan pulled me outside to talk privately. She immediately asked if I'd come about her brother's situation. I almost laughed. I'd gone through all that effort to put him in there. Why would I help get him out? But I didn't address that at all. Instead, I told her I'd transferred my job to someone else, and the personnel department would be notifying her soon. She didn't understand at first, so I spelled it out. Since I was going to the countryside with no idea when I'd return, there was no point keeping the job, so I gave it to someone else. She completely lost it. She screamed at me, asking how I could do this. I shrugged and said it was my job to do with as I pleased. When she demanded to know what would happen to her, I asked why that was my problem. Then she tried threatening me. Aren't you afraid of what my brother will say? I looked at her coldly and said she had some nerve even mentioning her brother to me, given everything the Sun family had done. She panicked and started babbling that her brother had been set up by Su Yu and begged me not to believe it. I dropped my smile entirely. You know exactly what your family has been scheming. Do I look like a fool to you? I pushed past her and walked away, warning her not to come bother me again unless she wanted consequences she wasn't prepared for. Xiaoyan stood there, face white as paper, muttering to herself in disbelief. On top of everything else, the family's stolen money had never been recovered. The police investigation had turned up nothing and concluded it was most likely an inside job, which only made things worse for the Sun family. What I didn't witness but later learned was that the Sun family completely fell apart after I left. The family had already been fighting non-stop over Sun Ruiming's scandal. Then when the police concluded that their missing money was probably stolen by someone in the household, the chaos got even worse. Everyone started accusing each other. Xiaoyan had gone to work that day just to escape the madness at home. She'd planned to leave early and sweet-talk me into transferring the job to her before I left. Instead, I'd hit her with the news that I'd already given it to someone else. She was furious. At me, but even more at Su Yu. She figured that if Su Yu hadn't gotten Sun Ruiming caught, I wouldn't have cut ties so completely. Without even changing out of her work clothes or telling her boss, she ran straight home. But things at the Sun house had gotten even worse. The connections Su Yu's family had pulled didn't hold. Sun Ruiming and Su Yu's situation couldn't be smoothed over. Both families' reputations were dragged through the mud. The eldest and second daughters-in-law were now demanding the families split up. Even the father couldn't control the situation. The mother fainted from the stress. When Xiaoyan burst in and saw the chaos, she broke down completely. And this was only the beginning. The Hua and Gu families had seized the moment to make their move against both the Sun and Su families, though the Sun family didn't know that yet. When Shiaan announced through tears that I'd transferred my job to someone else, the room went dead silent. The second sister-in-law asked who I'd given it to. Shiaan realized she'd been so angry she forgot to even ask. Then the eldest sister-in-law exploded, blaming everything on son Ruiming. She said if he hadn't cheated and caused this disaster, the family wouldn't be in ruins. She threatened to divorce and take her children back to her parents' house if they didn't split the family. The second sister-in-law backed her up. The father, worn out from arguing, gave in. They split the family, though it was almost comical since there was nothing to split. No money, no grain. The eldest and second son's families would cook separately and keep their own belongings. Everything else, along with son Ruiming, the youngest brother's son Xingming who was going to the countryside, and Xiaoyan, would stay with the parents. Even with so little to divide, the daughters-in-law agreed. The son family was broken. When the mother woke up and discovered the family had already been split, she nearly fainted again. Then the father came back, from somewhere looking even grimmer. He told his wife to pack up son Ruiming's things. He needed to deliver them first thing in the morning. The mother, still dazed, asked blankly, "Pack for what?" What I didn't know is that the son family situation had gotten even worse. The father came home with terrible news. Despite the Su family's connections and their story about the couple dating, the authorities weren't buying it. Too many witnesses had seen what happened. It was classified as a moral conduct issue, and son Ruiming would have to undergo re-education. There was no way around it. The mother was frantic. She demanded they go confront the Su family, but the father just sat there, defeated. He knew it was over. The mother started hitting him, screaming at him to do something. Then a thought hit her. Find Chu Yunyi. She started dragging her husband toward the door, babbling that I was their only hope. Meanwhile, I was at the Wei family's house discussing something that would solve their housing problem. I told them that after Hongyan's eldest brother Wei Hongjun got married and completed the traditional return visit to the bride's family, the newlyweds could move into the spare room at my house. They could stay until the canned food factory assigned them proper housing. Wei's mother could hardly believe it and made me repeat myself. Wei's father was so relieved his worried expression finally relaxed. He promised they'd take perfect care of the house. It would be exactly as I left it when I returned. I told them I trusted them completely and would clear out part of the kitchen before leaving so the couple could set up their own cooking. I had them wait until after the wedding to move in for two reasons. First, weddings bring crowds of strangers, and I didn't want outsiders getting a good look at my house. Second, Grandpa hadn't yet passed his first 7-day memorial period, and I wanted the courtyard kept peaceful. Tomorrow was actually Grandpa's 7th day. Huawan Xing had already agreed to pick me up early and drive me to pay respects. With everything I could think of taken care of, I headed to a state-run restaurant. I bought 10 steamed buns for the road tomorrow and ate a bowl of plain noodle soup for dinner. No point buying groceries when I was leaving in the morning. As I approached my front gate, I ran straight into the Sun family rushing toward me. The mother lunged at me, wailing and begging me to save son Ruiming. I stepped aside in disgust and asked what they thought they were doing. The father quickly told Xiaoyan to hold her mother back. Xiaoyan didn't want to. She would have been happy to let her mother attack me, but her father shoved her forward, so she reluctantly grabbed her mother and told her to calm down. The father checked that nobody was around, then put on a friendly act. He reminded me that Xiaoyan and I used to hang out and that son Ruiming and I had spent plenty of time together. He begged me to help, for the sake of our past friendship. I despised men like him, watching his wife and kids scheme and manipulate without ever stopping them, and now coming to me for help. I told him plainly that I was just an orphan girl, and he was overestimating my abilities. Besides, given what his son had done, did he really think it was appropriate to ask me to rescue him? His words sounded polite enough, but there was a veiled threat underneath, hinting he might reveal my past connection with son Ruiming. I wasn't the original girl. Threats didn't scare me. Before he could finish, I cut him off and said I was leaving for the countryside tomorrow, and whatever happened in the capital after that had nothing to do with me. Then I reminded him that Grandpa's and my parents' old friends would look after me. That shut him up. He knew those people were powerful enough to cause him real trouble. The mother tried to grab me again, but the two daughters-in-law rushed over and held her back. Then the eldest son, Sun Jiaming, ran up and whispered something to his father. The father's face changed instantly. He shot me one last resentful look and said, "Let's go home." I watched them leave and thought to myself, what goes around comes around. Their reckoning was only just beginning. Once out of earshot, the father demanded to know what was going on. Son Jiaming looked terrible. He said he'd had no warning, but an official notice had come down. He was on a list, and there was no refusing. His wife was furious, blaming everything on son Ruiming. The father knew someone had pulled strings to get his eldest son put on whatever list this was, all because of son Ruiming's scandal. His chest ached with anger, but he told everyone to stop embarrassing the family in public and get home. Meanwhile, in a hospital across the city, a scene was playing out that I knew nothing about. A woman named Jiang Jingya was anxiously watching doctors examine a young man in a hospital bed. The doctor reassured her that as long as the wounds didn't get infected, her son would recover, though if he'd been brought in any later, it could have been fatal. The woman held her son's hand, scolding him for scaring her. The young man on the bed forced a weak smile and told his mother not to worry. Then his father, Shiaan, rushed in. The mother broke down in tears of relief when she saw her husband. The father comforted his wife, then turned to his son and told him to stop causing them so much worry. The young man, Jingrui, was quietly frustrated. He'd been injured completing a mission, and if it hadn't been for a certain girl who stepped in to save him, he might not have survived at all. It seemed the wounded man I'd helped in that dark alley was someone from a very important family. Meanwhile, at the hospital, the young man I'd saved, Jingrui, was anxiously looking around the room for the people who had brought him in. His mother noticed and asked who he was looking for. He asked where his team was. She explained that most of them still had duties, and the one left to watch over him had stepped out to make a phone call. Jingrui was worried, not about himself, but about me. He'd seen me draw those dangerous men away to save him, and he had no idea if I'd escaped safely. Those men were all ruthless killers. When his comrade Lucheng returned, Jingrui immediately asked about the situation. Lucheng leaned in close and whispered that the items from their mission had been safely delivered to the research institute. They'd also found 5 bodies nearby, though identities were still being confirmed. Jingrui's heart sank. He was terrified one of them might be me. He asked carefully if any civilians had been harmed. Lucheng said no, since there hadn't been many people out at that hour. Not hearing what he really wanted to know, Jingrui's face fell with disappointment. He told Lucheng to go handle the remaining loose ends and just send someone to help him. So it turned out the man I'd rescued wasn't just anyone. He was a military officer on a mission, and he was now searching for me without even knowing who I was. Back at home, I started packing for the countryside. Since I'd only been gone a year or so, and the way families' newlyweds would be living in my house, I didn't need to worry about the place falling apart. I packed winter clothes and bedding into clean sacks to mail ahead tomorrow morning, which would also conveniently explain why I didn't seem to be carrying much, covering for everything stored in my space. For the rest, a small bundle of clothes and a suitcase would do. Before leaving, I wanted to secure anything valuable. I went to my adoptive parents' room and collected a small box the adoptive mother had once shown the original girl. Inside were 2 small gold bars and a pair of jade bracelets, intended as the original girl's future dowry. I didn't touch anything else in the room. It held the original girl's memories with her parents, and she used to sit there sometimes just to feel close to them. Then I moved to Grandpa's room. I collected everything from a hidden compartment and started covering the furniture with sheets. But when I pulled open the bottom drawer of the dresser, I found a leather folder. Inside was a hospital medical file. When I read the diagnosis, my mind went blank and my heart ached terribly. Grandpa had been seriously ill. He must have known he didn't have much time left and had been quietly planning for the original girl's future. When danger came during the mission with the Hua family, perhaps part of the reason he threw himself in harm's way was because he knew his days were numbered anyway. He chose to use his remaining life to protect someone else and secure powerful allies for his granddaughter. I sighed deeply. What a tragedy that the original girl had wasted Grandpa's sacrifices and careful planning. She had thrown away her life over a worthless man like son Ruiming, completely failing the old man's devotion to her. I put Grandpa's medical records back in the folder and stored everything in my space. Since the old man had devoted everything to the original girl, I'd let these painful secrets rest. The next morning, Hua Wanqing arrived early to drive me. Since religious rituals weren't allowed these days, I only brought Grandpa's favorite wine and some pastries from the department store. When I got in the car, I was surprised to find Gu Peiyan and a young man already inside. Hua Wanqing introduced him as Gu Shibei, and I immediately knew who he was. He was the person Grandpa had gone to treat medically. Because of that trip, Grandpa's vehicle was ambushed, and he died saving Gu Peiyan. My feelings were complicated looking at him. Gu Shibei noticed my frown and thought I blamed him. He apologized sincerely and told me that from now on, I was like his own sister, and I could count on him for anything. I appreciated the sentiment, but I wasn't the type to guilt-trip people. I told him that knowing Grandpa, he would have made the same choice to save someone regardless of the circumstances. He didn't need to blame himself. Half an hour later, we arrived at the cemetery. The moment I saw Grandpa's headstone, my eyes stung with tears, even though I wasn't the real granddaughter. I opened his favorite wine, poured a cup, and laid out the pastries. Hua Wanqing and the Gu family paid their respects and renewed their promises to protect me, then stepped back to give me privacy. I lifted the wine cup and spoke quietly. Grandpa, I hope it's okay that I call you that. I'm not her, but I've become her. Thank you for everything you did, for her and for me. I poured the first cup on the ground before his headstone. Then I talked to him about everything that had happened these past few days, told him all the things I'd done, and offered 3 cups of wine. I stood there for a long time before finally saying, I'm heading to the countryside today. When I come back to the capital, I'll visit you again. I bowed deeply and walked away. Back in the city, the Gu family got out partway. Once the car started moving again, Hua Wanqing shared some news. Son Ruiming had been caught doing shady things at his workplace too. Combined with the indecency charges, he was being sentenced to labor reform in the far northwest. I understood immediately. The Hua and Gu families had made their move. But Son Ruiming had brought it on himself. If he'd been an honest person, nobody could have found dirt on him. Hua Wanqing noticed I didn't react and seemed quietly impressed by my composure. Then he told me about the Shin family. Shin Chongyang had been hospitalized with a severe stroke and was in critical condition. All the terrible things the Shin family had done over the years had been reported to the authorities. This time, the evidence was overwhelming, and many of their former victims had come forward to testify. The Shin family was finished. There was no escaping justice now. When Hua Wanqing told me about the Shin family's downfall, I said coldly that it was karma catching up with them. I was confident that once those account books and evidence were reported, combined with all the stolen goods still in their other properties, the Shin family would never recover. The Gu family had gotten out of the car early specifically to seize this opportunity and destroy the Shin family completely. Hua Wanqing took me to lunch at a state-run restaurant, then drove me home to pick up my luggage. He looked surprised when he saw I only had 1 bundle and a suitcase. I quickly explained that I'd mailed the heavier items ahead. Since the Hua family had pulled strings, my assignment wasn't random. I already knew exactly which production brigade I'd be joining. That put his mind at ease. Just as I was heading out, Wei's mother and Hongyan came into the courtyard. I handed over a set of house keys. Wei's mother thanked me again, saying I'd solved a huge problem for their family. I told her not to make a fuss. Having her son and his wife live here meant someone would look after the place, and they were paying rent, so everyone benefited. The rent I'd set was much lower than normal, and Wei's mother knew it. She handed me the first payment, and I accepted it without fuss. The rent was mainly so nobody could gossip about the arrangement. I wrote out a receipt on the spot and told her to keep it safe. She understood immediately. With that receipt, if anyone came stirring up trouble, she'd have proof everything was legitimate. She handed me a cloth bag of homemade food for the train ride. I accepted it gratefully. It was a kind gesture, and taking it would put their hearts at ease. Hua Wanqing carried my bags to the car, while Hongyan hugged me tightly, saying she'd miss me. I hugged her back and reminded her I'd already given her my countryside address. She could write any time. As we walked out, I told them both to take care. The mother and daughter stood at the corner watching until our car turned and disappeared. Meanwhile, the Sun family's troubles kept multiplying. The neighborhood committee had already come knocking on Shiaan's door. With Sun Ruiming's scandal making the family a focus of attention, they'd immediately learned she was now unemployed. After the officials left, Shiaan had a meltdown at home. But the family had already split apart, and nobody cared whether she went to the countryside or not. Then the eldest son, Sun Jianming, came running home in a panic, shouting that something terrible had happened. His father snapped at him to calm down, asking if the family hadn't been humiliated enough already. I didn't witness any of this, but the Sun family's world was crumbling apart. Sun Jianming came home sweating and gasping that Sun Ruiming was being sent to the far northwest for labor reform. The father's teacup crashed to the floor. He'd asked around just yesterday, and nobody had mentioned the northwest. Sun Jianming explained that he'd bribed someone with a pack of cigarettes to get the real story. Sun Ruiming had been secretly dealing in stolen factory materials at his workplace, and someone had ratted him out. The father slumped into a chair, muttering that it was truly over now. The mother asked why this had to come out at this exact moment. Sun Jianming explained that 2 nights ago, some of Sun Ruiming's accomplices had been caught committing a crime, and under pressure, one of them had given up Sun Ruiming's name. The mother tried to argue that since Sun Ruiming was already in custody when the others got caught, it shouldn't involve him. But the father cut her off. There was no point arguing anymore. He asked when Sun Ruiming would be sent away. Sun Jianming glanced at his trembling mother and said it would probably be very soon. The mother collapsed to the floor. Just then, the eldest daughter-in-law came home furious. Her temporary job had been taken away that morning. Too many people had wanted her position, and with the Sun family name now toxic, she'd been the first to go. The mother tried to defend Sun Ruiming, saying maybe the daughter-in-law had offended someone on her own. That set off another explosion. The daughter-in-law fired back, asking if the mother had any idea how badly the Sun family's reputation stank now because of Sun Ruiming. By noon, the second son and his wife came home equally angry. They'd both been shunned by their coworkers. The second son said that if he hadn't been on good terms with his section chief, he would have been reassigned. Even so, everyone kept their distance from him like he was contagious. The mother slapped her legs and wailed, asking what sins she'd committed to deserve this. The whole family destroyed. Shiaan muttered that it was all Sun Ruiming's fault for trying to play 2 women at once. Now he'd capsized, and they were all drowning with him. The mother glared at her husband and blamed Su Yu for seducing her precious son. As for me, I couldn't have cared less about the Sun family's chaos. They were getting exactly what they deserved. I'd avenged the original girl, and that was that. Hua Wanqing went with me to the youth office to pick up my train ticket, then took me to a friend at the station who swapped my hard seat for a sleeper berth. He hadn't arranged the sleeper ticket through the youth office on purpose. He didn't want the other sent-down youth to see it and cause unnecessary trouble. He'd arranged everything with his friend ahead of time, so it went smoothly. Instead of squeezing through the regular entrance with all the other passengers, I went through a separate channel directly onto the platform. This was the first stop, so the train was already waiting. I found my berth quickly and put my things away. Hua Wanqing handed me a bag from his friend and told me it had food and various ration tickets inside. He reminded me again about a man called Uncle Lee, a former soldier who'd served under him, now working as the commune secretary where I was headed. If I ever needed help, I should go to him. I was truly grateful. Whatever happened, I owed these people a debt of kindness. Hua Wanqing gave me a few more reminders, then left to make it to a morning meeting. Once I was alone in the compartment, I opened the bag. On top were 2 boxes of Beijing pastries. Underneath were bags of powdered milk, canned meat, malted milk powder, candy, egg cakes, and cookies. Tucked into the inside pocket was an envelope full of ration tickets and even a bicycle ticket. My heart warmed. I'd only muttered once about not being able to bring my bicycle, and he'd remembered. I made a mental note to send local specialty products back to them once I got settled. I had to repay their kindness somehow. I'd just finished putting everything away when a middle-aged woman came in with her luggage.
He nodded her head politely.
I spread a bedsheet on my berth and planned to lie down for the whole trip. Ever since I'd arrived in this body, I'd been running nonstop and was exhausted. Then a married couple came in. The wife looked ill and was being supported by her husband. He gently helped her lie down on the empty lower berth, then rushed off to get their bags. When he came back, he lovingly fussed over her, scolding her for trying to travel alone in her condition. She tugged at his sleeve, embarrassed, and told him to keep his voice down. He said work could never be more important than her, and if anything happened to her on the road, how would he face her parents and brothers? Listening to them care for each other so tenderly, I couldn't help but feel moved. Just then, another pair walked in, a mother and a young girl. The compartment was getting crowded, so I took off my shoes and climbed up to my berth. But before I could settle in, I heard the girl complain in an unhappy voice, asking why both lower berths were taken. She turned to the older woman and asked, "Annie Wong, don't we have a lower berth ticket?" I overheard the drama between the girl and the older woman. She called Annie Wong. It turned out Annie Wong had sold the girl's brother's lower berth ticket and pocketed the money, likely to send to her own family. The girl accused her of doing exactly that, calling her relatives bloodsuckers. The woman tried to defend herself, claiming the lower berth wasn't safe anyway. The girl was furious but couldn't do anything since both lower berths were already taken. She huffed and climbed up to the middle berth above me. With all 6 berths filled, I was relieved. Nobody seemed too difficult to deal with, which meant my 2-day, 1-night journey should be relatively peaceful. I was so exhausted from the past few days that the rhythmic clanking of the train lulled me to sleep almost instantly. Exploring my space could wait. As someone who'd lived multiple lives and had special abilities before, I wasn't in any rush. Besides, doing anything unusual in a crowded train was risky. There would be plenty of time later. I slept so deeply that I missed lunch entirely. The smell of other people's dinner finally woke me up. The woman on the middle berth across from me teased that I was quite the sleeper and wondered how I'd managed to sleep at night after napping all day. I just smiled without answering. I got up, grabbed my enamel cup and pretended to fetch some water, secretly swapping it with boiled well water for my space. I was starving, so I pulled out my bag and took out 1 steamed bun from the state restaurant and 1 bean bun and an egg that Wei's mother had made. I'd stored all my food in the space after boarding since the summer heat would spoil everything. After this meal, I'd save the rest for later and find opportunities to eat properly once I reached the countryside. I didn't want anyone noticing I had too much food. Just as I finished eating and was about to stretch my legs, a scream came from the next compartment. A girl on the lower berth was staring at her bedding in shock. It turned out a boy on the middle berth above her had urinated in his sleep, and it had dripped down onto her bed. The boy's mother, instead of apologizing, started scolding the girl for yelling and scaring her son. A man across from them spoke up, saying this was a public space, and the boy was too old for this kind of thing. The mother doubled down, saying he was just a child and couldn't help it. The girl on the lower berth exploded. The boy looked about 10 years old, hardly a small child. She jumped up and marched off. The mother thought she'd scared the girl away and didn't think much of it. But the girl came back moments later with 2 trained police officers behind her. She pointed at the family and said they were allowing their child to behave indecently in a public space. The mother went berserk, accusing the girl of being vicious and trying to ruin her son's life. The argument next door escalated into a full-blown shouting match. I poked my head out to watch how things would play out. The girl and the woman from our compartment also came down from their berths to look. The woman smugly told the girl, "See? This is what happens when you sleep on a lower berth." The girl rolled her eyes and warned her to drop the scheming or she'd report everything when they got home. Just then, the fight next door got physical and the crowd of onlookers pushed backward. The girl was turned away and didn't see it coming. She nearly fell. I reached out and steadied her just in time before the crowd could knock her over. She smiled gratefully and thanked me. I just nodded and said it was nothing. The trained police took the mother and son away for education. Staff came to clean up and replace the soiled bedding. Peace returned, briefly. The mother and son came back shortly after. The boy had behaved in front of the police, but the moment he was back, he started acting up again. He threw a tantrum, refusing to sleep on his own berth and demanding a lower one. After the earlier incident, both lower berth passengers in their compartment wanted nothing to do with them. The other passengers on their side flatly refused to switch. So the woman came over to our compartment. I'd already climbed into bed and closed my eyes. I wanted absolutely nothing to do with these people. She approached the sick woman on the lower berth across from me and asked to switch. Before the woman could respond, her husband spoke up firmly, saying no, his wife was ill and couldn't climb up and down. Then the boy lost control completely. He screamed that he wanted that specific berth and charged forward, shoving the sick woman hard just as she was sitting up. Her body slammed against the partition wall, and the boy's momentum carried him right on top of her. There was a loud thud. Even pretending to sleep, I was worried. That woman was genuinely sick. Her husband cried out her name in panic. His enamel cup crashed to the floor, splashing hot water onto the boy and his mother's legs and feet. They both screamed about being scalded. The husband shoved the boy aside and rushed to his wife. Then someone gasped there was blood on her pants. The husband's eyes went red with fear. He shouted desperately for someone to call the attendants and find a doctor on the train. The whole car erupted in condemnation of the mother and son. The pair, who had been wailing about their burns moments ago, were so frightened by the seriousness of the situation that they went completely silent. I hadn't planned on getting involved. I was too young. Who would believe a girl my age knew medicine? But when the train attendants broadcast a request for a doctor and nobody came forward, and I could see the woman's condition worsening, I couldn't just lie there anymore. I spoke up and told them I'd studied medicine with my grandfather for several years. If they were willing to trust me, I'd examine her. The attendant frowned at how young I looked, but the husband was too panicked to care. He begged me to help right away. I didn't even have time to put my shoes on properly. I shuffled across and took the woman's pulse. What I found made me frown. After carefully confirming, I turned to the attendant and said she was showing signs of a miscarriage. I urgently asked if anyone on the train had acupuncture needles or any needles at all. The husband froze. "You're pregnant?" he asked his wife in disbelief. She was equally shocked. She said her periods had always been irregular, so she hadn't known. She looked at me with trembling voice, asking if it was really true. But there was no time for this. I told the attendants to find needles immediately, or she'd lose the baby. They rushed off but could only find 2 sewing needles in their break room. They ran to other carriages to search for more. Meanwhile, I started pressing key acupuncture points on the woman's body to stabilize the pregnancy. Guanyuan, Sasanli, and several others on her abdomen, back, and limbs. Thankfully, it was summer, and she wore thin clothing, making it easier to work. But pressure points alone could only help preserve the pregnancy, not stop the bleeding. I was getting anxious. Then an attendant came running back, out of breath, holding a handful of safety pins. It wasn't ideal, but it was all we had. I asked for alcohol to sterilize them. Then, realizing this era might not have rubbing alcohol on trains, I told them to have the dining car boil the straightened pins in water instead. The kitchen staff didn't hesitate when they heard it was to save someone. When the attendant brought back the pot, I noticed someone had thoughtfully included a small spoon and chopsticks. I was silently grateful. I scooped out some boiling water and sterilized my hands, ignoring the burning pain. I had someone use the chopsticks to fish out the pins and place them in the spoon. Everyone else cleared out of the compartment. With only the husband assisting, I began inserting the makeshift needles. Safety pins were nothing like proper silver acupuncture needles. The stiffness was completely different, and by the time I finished, I was drenched in sweat. But the bleeding stopped. I didn't want to be overconfident, though. I told them that while the immediate danger had passed, the woman's body was very weak and she was already dealing with an existing illness. She needed to get to a proper hospital as soon as possible to ensure the baby would be safe. The couple was deeply grateful. After speaking with the attendants, they decided to get off at the next station and go straight to a hospital. The troublesome mother and son were also forced to get off at the same station. They couldn't just walk away after causing such a serious incident. While the husband was packing their things, the sick woman looked at me weakly and asked if I could leave them a contact address. I knew what she meant, but we were strangers who'd met by chance, and I didn't want any complications. I told her I was a sent-down youth and didn't even know exactly where I'd end up yet. Helping each other on the road was just the right thing to do, no need to make a fuss about it. Seeing how overjoyed both of them had been when they learned about the pregnancy, I reminded her gently to keep her spirits up during the pregnancy. It would be good for the baby. She said she'd remember everything I told her. The train pulled into the station. The husband picked up his wife in his arms and told me his name was Gong Baodong, that he worked in security at the Beijing steel factory, and his wife was Xie Zhuanzi. He said he would never forget what I'd done for them. He was too focused on his wife and baby to push further, but I could tell he planned to track me down later through connections at the youth office. I smiled and told them that meeting was fate, and helping was just the natural thing to do. The woman looked back at me with pale face and said she hoped we'd meet again. I smiled and nodded, but thought to myself, in a world this big, what were the chances? After they left, I noticed quite a few passengers sneaking glances at me. Nobody had expected a girl this young to have such medical skills. It was already dark outside. I mixed some malted milk powder with spirit spring water for my space, drank it, washed up, and got back into bed to resume my rest. But I couldn't fall asleep. I'd slept too long during the day, and the excitement from earlier hadn't worn off. So I let my consciousness enter the space to explore. The first thing that caught my eye was the green. The watermelon seeds I'd planted with well water had grown into vines half a foot long. Even the ones watered with regular tap water had sprouted tiny buds. I was delighted. This space couldn't compare to what I'd had in previous lives, but I was more than content. Once I got settled in the countryside, I'd find all sorts of seeds. With these rock crevices for growing, life out there could actually be quite comfortable. For now, there wasn't much more I could do without proper seeds, so I headed toward the stone house. Meanwhile, after I'd left the capital, the Gu and Hua families had joined forces with other families who had grudges against the Shin family. They uncovered plenty of additional evidence of the Shin family's crimes. The Shin family's other properties were quickly sealed by authorities, and just as I'd predicted, both locations were found packed with ill-gotten wealth. The Shin family's own henchmen, who had tried to flee, ended up becoming the sharpest blades used to cut the family down. They revealed even more secrets in exchange for leniency. The Shin sons couldn't understand how their entire empire had collapsed overnight. But that's what happens when you walk dark roads for too long. Eventually you meet ghosts. The Shin family would soon scatter and crumble, becoming nothing but history. And the Sun family? Their lives had become an absolute disaster as well. Back in the capital, the Sun family's misfortunes kept piling up. The eldest son, Sun Jianming, was being transferred out of Beijing to support a branch factory, a done deal with no way to reverse it. Once you left the capital, getting back was nearly impossible. His wife, Ma Guiqin, had a massive fight with her mother-in-law and stormed off to her parents' house. Before they could even catch their breath, the youth office came knocking again. Previously, Xiaoyan's temporary job had kept them at bay, but now that she was officially unemployed, and with son Ruiming labeled a bad element, they weren't going to let her slide. After the officials left, Xiaoyan saw that nobody in the family would speak up for her. She ran out of the house in a fury. When she spotted the Wei family coming and going from my house, her jealousy boiled over. She demanded to know what they were doing there. Wei's father, not knowing about the bad blood between me and the Sun family, simply explained that I'd gone to the countryside and rented the house to his family. The Sun family had been scheming to get their hands on my house all along, and now it was rented to someone else. Xiaoyan was consumed with hatred. She didn't dare mess with the Wei family or go confront Sun Ruiming and Su Aiyu where they were being held, so she ran straight to Su Aiyu's house and started smashing things. When the Su family recovered from the shock, they beat her up without mercy. I didn't need to be there to know the chaos was unfolding. The point was, I'd avenged the original girl and grandpa. Now it was time to focus on my own life. Meanwhile, a completely separate drama was playing out at the Yi family's second household. A girl named Yi Wenhui came home fuming and told her mother, Shi Jingfang, about something her cousin Yi Wenwan had done. Apparently, the eldest cousin had pulled strings to get a spot in a performing arts troupe for another cousin, Yi Wenyue. When the enrollment form was delivered, Wenyue happened to be in the back garden with their grandfather. Wenwan accepted the form on Wenyue's behalf, but never handed it over. Instead, she filled in her own name and submitted it. Nobody discovered the switch until the eldest cousin returned from a mission and visited the troop to check on Wenyue. The eldest uncle was furious, and Wenjuan's own father, the third uncle, was black with anger. Wenjuan's mother tried to plead for mercy, offering compensation, but the eldest aunt refused. The performing arts spot had been too hard to get. Eventually, the third uncle coldly ordered Wenwan to give the spot back. Wenwan tried to play dumb and refuse, but the eldest uncle wouldn't budge. Shi Jingfang listened with disgust. She said the third uncle had terrible luck in his marriage. She kept her sharpest thoughts to herself, but she truly looked down on Wenjuan's mother, Zhang Baoxiang, a woman who had used underhanded tricks to marry into the Yi family in the first place. Meanwhile, in the capital, a conversation was happening that would eventually connect to my life. Shi Jingfang felt guilty that her daughter Yi Wenhui had to go to the countryside. But Wenhui was understanding. Her older brother had his own job and was about to get married, and her younger brother was too small. Someone in the family had to go, and she happened to be the right age. Her mother told her she'd been trading ration tickets to make a thick quilt and 2 sets of heavy winter clothes for the cold northeast. Wenhui reassured her that her father had pulled strings to get her into an agricultural corps, which came with a salary, much better than being assigned to a village. Then her mother mentioned something interesting. She said my adoptive mother Ding Zhilan's daughter, meaning me, had also gone to the countryside, and my location wasn't far from Wenhui's agricultural corps. She asked Wenhui to check on me when she had time. Wenhui couldn't remember who Auntie Zhilan was at first, so her mother poked her forehead and reminded her of a visit years ago. Talking about my adoptive mother made her eyes go red. She sighed that good people never live long enough. Then she began telling Wenhui about their history together. As for me, after 2 days and 1 night on the train, we were finally pulling into the station. Someone from the youth office came to tell me to gather at the square in front of the station after getting off. They'd hand us over to the local youth office here. When the train stopped, I grabbed my luggage and followed the crowd off. I noticed I was noticeably stronger than before, definitely the spirit spring water's doing. The platform was packed with people pushing and shoving. I was thankful for my space. If I'd had to carry everything by hand like everyone else, it would have been miserable. Seeing the chaos of this era with my own eyes, not just in books or TV shows, made it real. I had truly arrived in the time when my first life parents were born. Outside the station, I spotted a red welcome banner for Sent Down Youth. I squeezed my way over and found some had already gathered, all looking gloomy. I set my bundle on the ground and sat on my suitcase. Soon about 100 people had assembled. Thanks to the spirit spring water sharpening my senses, I could feel plenty of eyes on me. The original girl had been naturally pretty, and with the space water enhancing things, I now looked striking enough to turn heads. Some gazes were simply admiring, but others carried ill intent. I wasn't worried. I had more than enough ways to protect myself. The local youth office staff took over and climbed up high with a megaphone. They welcomed us and began calling names. When each person was called, they were directed to a specific vehicle. When my name was called, I shouted "Here," like everyone else, and headed to my assigned spot. When I got there, a few girls were complaining. One whined that the truck was too high to climb onto. Another fussed about her new clothes getting dirty on the unwashed vehicle. I glanced at them and thought, you're heading to the countryside now, what's the point of being so fussy? You'll have to get on eventually. I didn't waste time like the others. I swung my bundle into the truck bed in one motion, then asked a male Sent Down Youth already on board to help catch my suitcase. When he saw my face, his ears turned red, and he stammered out a yes. Then he reached down to pull me up, but I politely declined. In this era, even a small thing like that could be blown out of proportion. I climbed up by myself with ease, which drew even more attention. One of the girls who'd been complaining earlier wasn't happy about the praise I was getting. She muttered under her breath, calling me a fox spirit. I turned and gave her a middle finger. She didn't understand the gesture, but could tell it wasn't friendly. She demanded to know what I meant, but I didn't bother responding. I just picked up my luggage and found a spot in the middle section of the truck. A girl sat down next to me and complimented my agility, asking if I'd trained before. I looked over and saw a slightly chubby, round-faced girl with bright, sincere eyes. I told her I'd practiced with family elders for a while. She had a bubbly personality and spoke with a Tianjin accent. She introduced herself as Gung Erhong. I smiled and told her my name. She said it sounded beautiful. While we chatted, an argument broke out below. Two girls were blocking the way, still fussing about getting on the truck. A staff member finally told them to either get on or move aside. Before they could argue more, the people behind them pushed past. Erhong leaned over and whispered to me that those two would regret their fussiness once they ended up sitting at the tail end of the truck. I glanced at her with a smile. She was a smart one. This wasn't the modern era with paved highways. Most roads out here were bumpy dirt tracks full of potholes. Before the truck started moving, I wrapped a scarf around my face. Erhong copied me immediately, saying she was glad I'd reminded her. Several other girls followed our lead. Some people called us dramatic at first, but once we left the city and hit the dirt roads, they realized how wrong they were. The truck bounced and jolted constantly. Screams kept coming from the back where those two difficult girls were sitting, and they deeply regretted not getting on sooner. Soon the sounds of retching filled the truck bed. After the long train ride, everyone was already exhausted. Now sitting in an open truck eating dust, they all looked miserable and drained. After about an hour of bone-rattling bumps, our truck split off from the convoy and turned onto a different road. 10 more minutes later, we finally stopped. Several people didn't even bother with their luggage. They jumped off and started throwing up on the side of the road. I'd already expected this, since some people hadn't been able to hold it in and had vomited right in the truck. After a brief rest, the county youth office staff came over. They gave a short, encouraging speech, then started reading off assignments. When Erhong heard that we'd been assigned to the same village, she grabbed my arm excitedly. I was in a pretty good mood myself. At least those two difficult girls from earlier weren't coming with us. 6 of us were assigned to Songling village, 3 men and 3 women, including me and Erhong. We gathered our luggage and reported to the ox cart waiting for us. The man who'd come to pick us up was an older fellow who didn't bother hiding his displeasure. Apparently the sent-down youth who'd come to the village over the years had caused plenty of trouble. He introduced himself as Yang Tian, the village party secretary. He told us to load our luggage onto the cart and wait for a second one before heading to the village. While we waited, Erhong broke the awkward silence by chatting up the secretary. She introduced us all. There was Zhang Kuiwei, a tall thin guy from Tianjin like Erhong. A girl named Bai Suli from Tangshan introduced herself, though I caught a flash of dislike in her eyes when she looked at Erhong. Erhong noticed it too, and so did I, though Bai Suli didn't realize she'd been caught. Then there was Ruiming, a friendly, outgoing guy also from Tangshan, who asked the secretary to look after them. The last was Lu Qinglin from Tianjin, quiet and cold, saying nothing beyond his name. When the second ox cart arrived, driven by the secretary's nephew Yang Xiaoling, we loaded up and headed out. Xiao Guangming was a natural smooth talker and spent the ride getting information out of the secretary. The village was 16 li from the county town, with a commune sitting right at the halfway point. Over the years, about 20-something sent-down youth had been assigned to the village. Some went back to the city, some married locals, some transferred to the nearby agricultural corps, and some left for workers' universities. Currently 7 were still living at the youth quarters, 3 men and 4 women. Before long, we reached the commune. The secretary stopped the carts and told us he had business with the commune leaders and his nephew needed to pick up packages at the post office for the youth quarters. We had about half an hour to an hour. There was a supply cooperative across the road if we needed to buy anything. He warned us to be back on time. Anyone late would have to walk the rest of the way to the village on their own. I figured my mailed packages wouldn't have arrived yet, so I didn't bother asking about them. I just followed everyone to the supply cooperative across the road. It was working hours, so the store was pretty empty. I walked around and thought about how I'd need things for social occasions once I got to the village. I bought 2 packs of large biscuits, a pound of hard fruit candy, and since they had locally made liquor that didn't require ration tickets, I grabbed 2 bottles of that too. Hong, being her blunt self, asked why I was buying alcohol. I told her it had many uses, and it was smart to stock up early. She assumed I meant for keeping warm during the harsh northeast winters, and thought I was planning way too far ahead. We were clearly thinking on completely different wavelengths. I didn't need anything else for now. I had things like thermoses stored in my space from my house in the capital. I'd just wait a few days, come back to the commune to pick up my mailed packages, and use that as a cover story. We left the supply cooperative and saw Zhang Kuiwei standing outside. I told him Hong and I were heading to the state-run restaurant nearby and asked him to let the others know if they came looking. Hong asked why I bothered. I told her it was to avoid giving anyone, especially by Suli, a reason to complain. Hong agreed. That woman had already been passive-aggressive on the ox cart. The restaurant was just steps away. They had steamed buns ready, so I bought 5. By the time we reached the village, it would be dinner time, and I had no idea what the food situation was like at the youth quarters. Better to be prepared. Hong had the same thought, and bought 5 as well. We got back to the carts before the others. When they finally showed up loaded with bags, Bai Suli spotted us and immediately tried to show off, asking in a superior tone why we hadn't bought much. Hong shot back that her family had packed everything she needed, so there was nothing to buy. Then Bai Suli turned to me, noting I didn't seem to have brought much, and asking if I needed to stock up. I gave her a half smile and said she was really very thoughtful. She tried to play it off as concern between fellow sent-down youth. I told her calmly that my packages should arrive in a day or 2. Bai Suli had been trying to feel superior, but now both of us had shut her down. One with family pack supplies, the other with mailed packages. She tried to save face, saying her family thought mailing things was a waste of money and carrying everything yourself was too hard, so it was better to just buy things locally. Hong and I exchanged a glance. The woman really knew how to spin things in her favor. But since she wasn't technically wrong, we didn't bother arguing. Hong and I had figured out that Bai Suli was just the competitive, show-off type. Best to keep our distance in the future. Once the secretary and his nephew returned, we set off. About 40 minutes later, the 2 ox carts rolled into the village. Along the way, Bai Suli kept trying to brag about what she'd bought, but Hong and I refused to take the bait, which left her frustrated. The carts dropped us right at the youth quarters. The village workers had just finished for the day, and the existing sent-down youth were arriving back at the same time. Someone came out to greet us, a man named Xieliju, one of the veteran youth. The secretary introduced him, though I noticed his eyes were scanning our luggage with a calculating look. The secretary called for another man, Wang Jianhui, who turned out to be the person in charge of the youth quarters. The secretary told him to get us settled and take us to register with the accountant to collect our grain rations. He told us we could rest tomorrow but had to start working the day after. Bai Suli immediately complained, saying we were exhausted from the train, truck, and ox cart and needed more rest. The secretary gave her a sideways look and said bluntly, "No work means no work points. No work points means no food. Your choice." Then he left with his nephew. Wang Jianhui led us inside and called for a female youth named Xiao to help the women get settled. The youth quarters had just 3 rooms, a shared kitchen in the middle, 1 room for men and 1 for women. The moment Bai Suli saw the place, she started complaining about whether it was even livable. Xiao, who had been smiling, immediately turned cold. She told Bai Suli that all the village houses looked like this. If she didn't like it, she could pay to build her own. That comment caught my attention. I asked Xiao right away whether sent-down youth were really allowed to build their own houses. She confirmed it. We could, but when we left, the house would belong to the village. That explained what the secretary had mentioned earlier about some youth living outside the quarters. They'd built their own places. I filed that away as a real possibility, but decided to check out the room first before making any decisions. No need to rush. I'd just arrived. Xiao led us to the west room. It wasn't very big. A large heated sleeping platform took up half the space, and cabinets on the opposite wall left just a narrow walkway. 4 sets of bedding were already laid out on the platform. Squeezing 3 more people in would mean nobody could even turn over in their sleep. I made up my mind right then. I'd be building my own place. Xiao was clearly worried about the space too. Then Bai Suli spoke up again, complaining that the room was run down and the sleeping platform was way too small for everyone. Before anyone could react, Bai Suli claimed a spot on the sleeping platform for herself, ignoring everyone's expressions. Xiao frowned at her behavior. Then 2 more female youth came in, and the room felt impossibly cramped. One of them complained that their group of 4 had been comfortable before, and now with 3 more people, they couldn't possibly all sleep on one platform. I measured the space with my eyes. Even squeezed tight, the platform could only fit 6 people lying flat. For 7, everyone would have to sleep on their sides in the same direction. The mental image made me shudder. I turned to Xiao and said the other girl had a point. We simply couldn't all fit. Xiao sighed and said she couldn't solve this and we need to talk to the group leader, Wang Jianwei. I could tell she'd known about this problem from the start but didn't want to get involved. Bai Suli looked smug and told Hong and me to hurry up and find the group leader, since we were the ones without a place to sleep. Hong was already in a bad mood and snapped back, asking why Bai Suli seemed so happy about us having nowhere to sleep. I pulled Hong's arm and told her not to bother with that kind of person. Bai Suli flared up, demanding to know what I meant by that kind of person. I gave her an icy look and told her to watch her mouth and stop stirring up trouble. I warned her that my patience had limits, and if she truly pushed me too far, she wouldn't be able to handle the consequences. Between my words and the look on my face, she was scared silent. Having lived through multiple lifetimes, petty drama like this was beneath me. But some people just kept pushing until you put them in their place. The veteran youth Cui Aiji went outside and called for the group leader. When Wang Jianwei came out, she explained the situation clearly. The platform comfortably fit 4, could manage 5, and could squeeze 6 at most. With 3 newcomers, there simply wasn't enough room for everyone to rest properly after a hard day's work. Wang Jianwei admitted he'd overlooked this and said he'd go talk to the village leaders. But the woman cooking in the kitchen pointed out that everyone in the village was eating dinner right now, so it wasn't a good time to visit. Wang Jianwei agreed and told us to eat first. Afterward, he'd take us to the accountant to collect our grain rations and then find the secretary about the sleeping arrangements. He invited us newcomers to share dinner with the veteran youth as a welcome meal, apologizing that the food wasn't much. I didn't want to take advantage of their limited supplies. Nobody's grain fell from the sky. So I pulled out a can of meat from my luggage and handed it to Wang Jianwei, saying it was my small contribution to add a dish for everyone.